Good evening, dear friends. I'm very happy to welcome you. I'm very glad, and I won't hide my pleasure, to close this huge lecture, exhibition, and cultural season. This is a premiere. They asked for it very much. When we talk about metals in antiquity, we must understand one very sad truth, that after antiquity, there were the Middle Ages, and the items that were cast from different metals and in which the amazing art of ancient masters was embodied, they simply melted. This also happened in antiquity. In the famous papyruses Amherst and Abbott, which date back to the 11th century BC, it is told about the robbers of the royal tombs and those who set foot on the royal tombs in the Valley of Kings who were caught. They give testimony and talk about how they melted those amazing works of gold that were not found in the royal tombs. Later, when the Egyptian culture comes to its end in the 4th century of the new era, a significant number of cult statues of gods and goddesses will be melted, or those statues that remain will be taken to Constantinople and will die there. What is their fate? We do not know yet. Whether they were melted or somewhere else in the suburbs of Istanbul, Egyptian monuments will be found, no one knows. Anyway, it's funny, I'll start today's lecture with a joke. I was walking with my friends in the area of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and there were beautiful flower ponds, and one of these ponds, planted by a gardener by accident in a kind of stone cone, was actually a vessel for the sacrificial offerings of the 4th century of the new era. It was Egyptian. It was absolutely amazing, but due to the fact that there were no hieroglyphic signs and only by the shape you could recognise the thing, I stood next to this flower pond in awe, realising that in fact the earth hides a lot of amazing things there. Of course, since the very beginning of Egyptology, our anniversary year in September will be 200 years old, since the moment when the great Jean-Francois Champollion wrote his great letter to Mr. Dossier, in which he outlined the fundamental principles of deciphering the Egyptian letter 200 years from that date. So literally from the very beginning, the first expeditions that went to Egypt, they sometimes found absolutely amazing monuments. At that time, there was no such race for Egyptian art, and sometimes the local Europeans, especially in the Luxor area, although today there's a lot of talk about other regions of the country, they brought what today's outstanding European museums are proud of. Very often when we talk to you about Egypt, we imagine a colossal stone sculpture. We imagine gold, but like the gold of royal tombs, and this amazing world of sacred metal, which was primarily associated not with tombs, but with temples, remains outside the reach of a person who comes to a museum. On the other hand, when you look at any Egyptian exhibition, you see literally thousands, I do not exaggerate, small bronze statues of gods and goddesses. Here we have a wonderful statue of St. Volodymyr, and we know what kind of deity it is. Sometimes we can read on a pedestal who and even at what time dedicated a particular image to a particular deity. But often we ask ourselves a question, what is the context of these monuments? Where did they stand? Where were they found? What was all this incredible divine diversity made for? Today I will try to answer these questions. We have a luxurious photo material, but let's start from here. Eptasud is the most perfect of places, the great national temple of Egypt, already named after the neighbouring Arab tribe of Al-Karnak. Here's a frame of 1870s. This is a delightful Egypt where there is no Larka with tourist tickets and non-slip paths. This is Egypt in which the time of anticipation of great archaeological discoveries reigns. This is Egypt that hides a huge number of absolutely fantastic discoveries. When we talk about relations between Egypt and France, everyone immediately recalls Bonaparte. But in fact, if we talk about the relationship of the two countries from the point of view of cultural dialogue and discovery of France and Egypt, the so-called Franco-Tuscany expedition played a much larger role. These are the 1820s, and it was not just a French expedition, and at the same time an Italian one, which followed Bergenil. It was an expedition of outstanding people. Because it was headed by Champollion himself, it was his dream. We know that when the ship arrived from Marseille to the coast of Alexandria, he knelt down and kissed the Egyptian land. Together with his comrade, also a great expert on Egypt, Ippolito Rossellini, he organised an expedition that followed the Nile Valley, both Egypt and Nubia. They were dressed in oriental clothes. In the centre, with such an Arabian black beard, it was actually Champollion. Rossellini was standing on his side. It was not just a research expedition. They really described a lot of monuments, undertook small excavations, but it was also an expedition that brought exclusive heritage to Europe. This heritage is today divided into two museums. Most of it is stored in Paris, in Louvre, and the second part, which came from Rossellini, is stored in Florence, in the magnificent Egyptian collection of the Archaeological Museum of the city. Today there will be a lot of monuments, so it turns out, which were associated with this expedition. But the main thing, of course, is this amazing image got straight from the hands of Champollion to the Louvre in 1830. And probably if you try to do such a dubious thing as a comparative assessment of finds, but still it was, of course, in the first place. This image was found by local peasants in Karnak. There is even such a special term, sebahin. These are usually women who dig seba. Seba is a soil very rich in silica, which is formed from ancient heart bricks. Usually it is very common in Egypt in the 19th century. It was used for fertilization in the fields, and sebahin at the same time, from time to time, came to European archaeologists and got something incredible out of the pocket. In front of you is Karamam Amiritmut, the great wife of God, the high priestess of Karnak of the 9th century BC. This is an absolute masterpiece. I will sometimes call sizes today, because the Egyptian sculpture is all monumental, and it's very difficult to understand what is in front of us by the picture. 59.5 centimeters. This is the highest priestess during the reign of Tsar Sarkon II. But today we will be interested not in her life story at all, not in her position as the great priestess of the god Amun. We will be interested in the monument itself, because to start my story about Egyptian bronzes and in general about how the Egyptian master worked with metal, I, of course, decided on a masterpiece. Moreover, this masterpiece passed through the hands of Champollion. This statue has 11 different alloys. We will now look at it carefully. First, let's try to analyze what such a statue could have been made for and what is written on it. There is an inscription on the pedestal, and in general we will talk a little about it. It has not been preserved completely. It stands in a pose that assumes that her sisters were in her hands, ritual musical instruments. For those who do not know, I will show a frame where she will be with such instruments a little later. On it is the dress of the great priestess, which was originally decorated with an ornament that we in Egyptology call reishi. These are the feathers of the sacred birds. That is, the wings of the goddess keeper literally wrap her in such a cocoon around the arms, shoulders and chest. It all opens up and is adorned with an incredibly wide necklace of moustaches. Today there will be a lot of macro shots. It is important for me so that you and I understand this monument. On her head is an ibis. This is a Levantine wig, very fashionable at this time, because if you are fond of Egypt, or maybe a little fond of the Egyptian language, the name Karamama, or more precisely Karamat, it is not Egyptian, it is a Levantine by nationality. It was the time when several dynasties of Levantine origin ruled Egypt in the third transitional period. Once upon a time there was a sacred snake on the forehead, Uri. Apparently it was golden, so it was not preserved. And on the crown there is a modius. This is a flat round crown which is not on the head. There was also a whole construction of sacred boards, which we will also see. But of course what is most admirable is the absolutely incredible combination of shades of colour, which here the Egyptian artists received not at the expense of painting, but at the expense of a game with jewellery alloys, which I of course will also tell you about today. It is important for us to understand that this statue had a double function. During the life of Karamama, this statue was placed on the nose of the sacred boat of the god Amun. We imagine that in every Egyptian temple there was a holiday called Hau, resurrection, when one of the cult statues of god or goddess was taken to the sacred boat for some ritual action, for a conditional meeting with people, and thus breaking the border between the sacred and the profane space. The cult statue of God hidden on the nose, on the central part of this sacred boat. It thereby brought the sacred well-being, the sacred possibility of interacting with the world of gods into the profane world of ordinary people. We know this for sure because it is written in the will. The statue was placed by a person who could afford it. His name was Yatifnacht. He was the head of the silver and gold house of His Majesty, that is the great treasure, and he was in charge of the affairs of the wife of God Karamama. That is, this is her managerial office, and there was usually a whole tradition when in the first millennium BC the great wife of God was an indescribable authority in Karnak, when she, according to her status, largely overshadowed the pharaoh when she gave a wedding feast and raised the next priestess from the princess she chose from the best girls of the royal house. In this era, of course, the status of the wife of God was very, very great. So the first point, we will talk a lot about the boats today. This statue was literally a material embodiment of the great priestess who, along with her god, sailed along the waters of the Nile during the major Egyptian holidays. On the other hand, it is clear that when she went into the world of the eternal living, such a monument could not be destroyed or floated. This is a great national shrine. And then, in the northern part of the Karnak complex, this part was well preserved. There were special small shrines, one shrine for each wife of God, and after that such a statue became a cult image of the priestess, a memorial monument which from the point of view of ancient tradition embodied part of her essence. When Karamama got into the hands of Champollion from the local residents, he bought it. They do not write how much he bought it for, but he was incredibly delighted, and of course the Louvre just boomed, and literally from the first days of its appearance, let me remind you again, from 1830, Karamama became one of the iconic monuments of this meeting. This is one of the legends of the Louvre, and only in the early 2000s, after the pleas of the art historians who described Karamama looking at her with their honest eyes, a question arose in the Louvre whether we should do a chemical analysis of the materials and everything from which the priestess was made. It was then that the number of allusions appeared, and some absolutely amazing data about how this masterpiece was made. Let's take a closer look at her. She has a very special face. She has a thin, almost eagle-like profile, impressive outlined lips, encrusted with obsidian and a starry eye. Now, this encrustation, which the Egyptians loved very much, they often encrusted their metal objects. It gives this incredible look. Look carefully at the hands. You will see the remains of a golden leaf on them. And this moment, and today we will look at the monuments very carefully, shows that not only what has come to our time fully conveys the image of this work. Initially, apart from the face, all the open parts of the body of Karamama were gilded. And now let's imagine a bronze image. It goes in a dark, multicoloured, overflowing dress, and she has a golden flesh. This golden flesh is a very important concept for ancient Egypt, because in ancient Egypt, gold was considered directly the flesh of the gods. It is called so. Gold is the main symbol of immortality and immortality. Gold is one of the main metals of the mother goddess. First of all, Kador, the great goddess of love, heaven and motherhood, which was sometimes called Nubit gold. The golden flesh, which in this case conveys the body of a real priest, is also a message of immortality, a message of well-being, a message of immortality for her in the following centuries. In the Berlin Museum there was a monument, absolutely magnificent, depicting Karamama before the god Ammon, before her god. I show you a drawing of the 19th century. It is one of the saddest. The monument was lost during the Second World War. Only a few fragments of it are left. And here's a beautiful reconstruction. Imagine the golden sisters in your hands, this Levian wig and bead, the necklace, the dress. Look at her interesting construction on the modius. There is a sacred neck. This is a female neck. This is a symbol of the mother goddess. First of all, the goddess Mut, the wife of Ammon. She is the beloved goddess Mut, plus another Uri, the sacred cobra of the high crown of Upper Egypt. All the titles are written here. And pay attention, we will need it in a minute. Her wig is tied with ribbons, and the banded ribbons go down behind her shoulders from the necklace. Sorry, not from the wig, but from the necklace. This image allows you to visually reconstruct what Karamama saw initially. First of all, look at the work on the subtlety. We are talking about casting, which traditionally, according to the Egyptian model, was done with the method of wax waste. That is, initially there was a wax model which received a matrix and specially made moulded clay, and then there was this casting. All the details of the statue, hands, wig, were made separately, and only then, with the help of a special alloy based on gold, all these images of the goddess, the queen, the great priestess were assembled together. And now, before we look at the details separately, look how interesting. In the base of the statue, which is yellowish in colour, 12.6% tin, and the copper, which is soldered with tin, gives a yellow colour. Unfortunately, early restorers did not understand the idea of the ancient Egyptian master, because the hieroglyphs on the yellow pedestal, conditionally yellow, were made of black tinted bronze. They tried to erase the pigment, thinking that over time the bronze darkened. It was dark in its chemical composition. Now let's reconstruct Karamam as a woman walking on a yellow pedestal on which the prayers of her housekeeper are inscribed with black tinted bronze. Now let's look at her incredible necklace. Look how beautiful it is. And if you pay attention, you will see metals of different colours. 4 different colours of gold, pure gold, copper gold, that is gold in which a large percentage of copper, and such gold depending on the percentage of copper, it will give a red colour. Electrum. Electrum is called an alloy of gold and silver, in which silver is more than 25%. In Egypt, quite often, what we consider gold is actually very high in the content of gold and electrum, because of course there is a high percentage of metal and silver, which will give a completely white colour to its sockets. But silver is not 100%, not some incredible sample, but again with the presence of gold. That is, on the one hand, this is a technological impossibility. At that time we saw pure metal, and on the other hand there is a completely different symbolic thing that is emphasized in the texts. The presence of gold in any metal makes it sacred, and the possibility of this statue to be a worthy body, worthy of the spirit of Karamama entering it. There are many rows, very beautiful beads of the lower row are depicted. They depict, on the one hand, the flowers of the coastal water lily. This is Shammai. And on the other hand, in the form of such a lily, the sceptre of the queen looks, and therefore here this element of the necklace indicates its high sacred position in the temple. This is the Egypt in which for many centuries quite large contacts with the islands of the Mediterranean Sea flourished. So look at the second row of its necklace. You see absolutely such a wave resembling Meccan or some Aegean art, and despite the fact that there are such sockets inside, it is still a clear influence of Meccan art. I will now show you its necklace from behind, and you will see the ribbons, red, the sacred colour of which is transferred to another, again, proportion of metal. In this metal, from which the plates are made, depicting these ribbons in gold up to 30% copper, and then the master who created it by order of a very high-ranking person, as we now know, he calculated the percentage of metals and alloys in order to get the desired result. When we look at the Karamama, we must make an assumption that it lay in a relatively damp environment for quite a long time. It lay in the ground. And when by 2007, Elizabeth Delange, who then guarded the Egyptian collection of the Paris Assembly, began to study the Karamama, she came to an absolutely amazing result. Look carefully at its decoration. It all originally, according to the basic copper alloy, consisted of pits, as we would imagine pits. These are the cloisons, pits for incrustations. Then it was all gilded, and inside each golden pit was put a small feather of copper alloy, which by its shade resembled a grey colour, something like wet asphalt. When it was a new monument, it had silhouettes of feathers in which the grey space of this absolutely special alloy, which is not found in other Egyptian monuments, and it was clearly an author's design. Now you understand that this is a masterpiece not only from the point of view of Asian art, but also from the point of view of technology. Unfortunately, the nameless master, we do not know anything about him, and such a brilliant idea, absolutely realised, makes you think about this great priestess. And what about the cult statues of the gods that floated in the Middle Ages? What an incredible number of masterpieces we will never see with you. There are separate monuments, and of course we will talk about them with you today too. Well, and a few more details of an absolutely amazing monument that made the employees of the Louvre when they conducted the entire chemical analysis that I'm telling you about. But not only this, we perfectly understand that in Egyptian art, symbolic always prevails over aesthetic. And in the Egyptian mythology of the first millennium, that is before the New Age, there will be a long established trend that consists in the fact that Egyptian masters, Egyptian metallurgists, jewelers tried to get a metal that patinated in the way they wanted. And the most expensive, the most priceless, we know this from the texts, were considered statues that had a certain proportion of gold, silver and tin, which gave a black colour. And then these statues were covered with a patina very close to black colour. And this is what in Egyptian texts is called hemtikum. And this is black bronze. This is a famous sacred material that from the end of the New Kingdom was considered the most suitable for the spirit of the gods, for the earthly embodiment. We know about this because in Bedouin there is a whole room, a so-called metallurgical hall. This is actually a small room on the walls of which full proportions of the main sacred alloys, including mineral substances. For example, it will be absolutely surprising and understandable for the ancient Egyptians that when the golden statue of the goddess Hathor is poured on the goddess of love, it will not be visible from the point of view of the visual perception of the statue, but inside the statue of the goddess, turquoise will become her bones, gold will become her flesh, says the text. Therefore, it is also a very interesting point that now we can, with the help of new technologies, look at the composition of these alloys at least a little bit. We will have a diagram of alloys, of how much gold is here, how much silver, and how much gold is here. This is the secret sacred proportion. And this secret sacred proportion was changing in different eras. There was a fashion for more black bronze, less black bronze, some shades that appeared on the court things. The second thing with which, of course, we must start our today's story is the wonderful statue of the god Amun, which is proud of today in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But I am not in vain Howard Carter and George Herbert Lord Carnarvonsky, his patron saint. As we remember, these gentlemen 100 years ago, if we just count this year, found Tutankhamun's tomb. Our year is a double anniversary. Everyone knows Carter as an outstanding archaeologist who found the golden tomb. Everyone knows Carter as a pedant, thanks to whom things from Tutankhamun's tomb were recorded incredibly accurately. Few people know Howard Carter as a famous consultant of the antique market in Egypt at the beginning of the 20th century, and many outstanding works of art. And not only this, of those that I will show today, they passed through the hands of Howard Carter, whom the locals trusted very much. He knew the Arabic language very well, and often in the basement of some shop for a cup of tea, behind the torn curtains, it was Carter, the first of the Europeans, who was shown a particular unique work, including in 1916, he was taken out of the basement of this golden tomb in Karnak. And the tomb is amazing. The monument was created in the 9th century BC, so it is approximately modern, plus or minus Karamami. It weighs almost a kilogram. It is a very large golden thing. And immediately after that, of course, he offered it to Lord Carnarvonsky, especially since George Herbert had an amazing Egyptian collection. When Carnarvonsky exhibited this thing in the 1920s at one of the international exhibitions, it was a sensation. Everyone who was fond of Egyptian art wrote about it, they dreamed about it. And in 1926, after George Herbert died, his widow, Almina Carnarvons, who was actually indebted to him with all her fortune. He was from a poor nobleman's family. She was Rothschild's illegitimate daughter, so Almina could not keep these things in the castle in Heikler. They were associated with the early death of her husband, with all sorts of unpleasant associations, and she quickly sold all this for a colossal sum to the Metropolitan Museum. It was there that all the best things of the Carnarvon collection were found. Let's look at this amazing image of the god Amun. He is walking. In his right hand he has a whip of victory. This is a military sword, usually such a sword for the king. The god gives it to him during ceremonies before military campaigns. In his other hand he has an ankh, and for you to understand the level of work, ankh consists of 7 fragments which are forged and melted together. So the hands are made separately. The long chin of the hibiscus is made separately. All this, of course, makes the image amazing. Let me show you a closer look. Look, the handle of the sword, kipesh, is just a handle. It is made in the form of a lily, in the form of a heraldic lily of Shemai. Look, it will come in handy today. We will need this detail. The detail is absolutely incredible. The work's very subtle. And in order for you to imagine a complete reconstruction once again, I will remind you that the thin, stylized falcon feathers of Shuti, which were on his head, have not been preserved. Therefore, a wonderful statue of Tutankhamun under the protection of the god Amun from the Louvre. And here you see a large crown of Shuti, which will allow you to imagine what the crown of the golden Amun looked like. If you now look at Amun, at the top of his crown from behind, there is something like a pin here at the very top. This is a loop. And then the question arises about the function of the statue. Either it was like a suspension put on the neck of a large statue of the god Amun, or rather there were different hypotheses. It was placed in a certain sacred naos that is in a box for storing statues of the gods, and in order for a large and complex thing not to fall out of the naos, apparently it was attached to the sloop. I can offer you for such a reconstruction this wonderful monument. It is from the tomb of Tutankhamun. This is a golden naos which is covered with scenes depicting Tutankhamun and his wife Ankissa Amun. They are in the garden and during the hunt, so that you understand how much such monuments were valued. Well, the footprints remained from the statue that was there. There is a support pillar, a base, and here are 2 footprints from the foot. We know that the thieves penetrated the tomb of Tutankhamun twice, literally in the first month after the burial had been carried out. Why do we know this? Because the first thing they did was to steal the incense oils. They poured them out of the vessels into the brothel and took them out. That is, they had not yet climbed, and their value was such that they were stolen earlier than the golden items from the Tsar's tomb. Then, fortunately, without getting into the burial chamber, they plundered in the side rooms. They stole a certain number of rings. They took only monolithic gold, and they opened the doors of the naos and stole the statue that was there. It is difficult to say that there was a golden statue of the Tsar himself or some deity, but the shape of the naos itself, which ascends to Perur, to the great house, to one of the first temples in Egypt, such a shape of the temple was worshipped in the southern limits of the country. In Upper Egypt, you can imagine that approximately such an Amun was in such a naos. This moment is important to us because the naos, small or large, were places for all the statues of the gods. And no matter how many statues of the gods we see today, each of them once stood in a naos, more or less rich, depending on what its owner could afford. Of course, speaking of Carthage and Carnarvon, I cannot, literally for a moment, not mention the absolutely fantastic golden things that were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. These are absolute masterpieces. The burial mass that you see now weighs 10.5 kilograms, pure gold. Not so long ago, I told you that the alloy of the face and the alloy of the headdress is different. The face was changed. The face itself is made of more gold than the main part of the headdress. But moving away for a second from this incredible embodiment of the dream of a man about the golden legend of the ancient world, I will remind you that not only gold made of metals was among the most interesting acquisitions of Carthage and Carnarvon in the tombs. Before I tell you about this, I will present one more tiny fragment of Tutankhamun's burial to your court. This is the base of the golden coffin, the innermost one, which weighs 110 kilograms. Its thickness is from 2.5 to 3.5 millimeters. That is, it is a large volume. And on the base, a fantastic image of the goddess Isis, which opens its wings here. Now, this pose is called Asheturet, the Great Horizon. It becomes the very horizon in which Tutankhamun should be reborn as the new sun in the east. And here, embodied together with the hieroglyphs of prayer on the flesh of the golden coffin, it actually sits on a very interesting hieroglyphic sign. What the knees of the goddess Isis are bent on is a tiger. That is, it is a jewellery device in which metal melts and drops of liquid gold flow down from this tiger. This is how the Egyptian hieroglyph of Nub, gold, which was the main symbol of immortality for ancient Egypt. Today we celebrate it here, and I will come back to this story, but still, not only gold. This dagger produced a sensation several years ago. Everyone knew it was made of iron. Iron was an extremely rare material in ancient Egypt because it could only be brought from the north of Anatolia, roughly speaking, from the territory of modern northern Turkey. There was no development of iron in Egypt. On the left you can see a photo of Gary Burton, the official photographer of the mission. You can see him lying on Tutankhamun's mummy. By the way, the work was done in Egypt by an Asian craftsman because the scabbard includes ornaments that are quite alien to Egypt, but met in Egyptian art, because we know that in the New Kingdom, this is the New Kingdom, foreign craftsmen often worked in Egypt. So the composition of this metal from which it is made includes iron, nickel and cobalt, a combination that occurs only in meteorites. This is meteorite iron. Ancient Egyptian texts called it bioempit, heavenly ore. Moreover, this bio ore is one root that includes everything that is related to ore and wealth. On the other hand, bio ore is still amazing, wonderful and amazing. That is, this moment of surprise for this heavenly metal also exists here. Even if it was an Asian work, the composition of this scabbard, the metal, is identical to the composition of the meteorite, which was found in the 19th century, a part of a huge meteorite, relatively huge, which fell in the area of the Mediterranean coast near Mersa Matruh to the west of Alexandria. That is, a part of this meteorite was found in the 19th century and part apparently was found in the 14th century BC. Iron was considered a ritual material, a magical material. Quite often small pieces of meteorite iron were used to make various amulets. In general, everything related to iron, including hematite, for example, has such magical associations in Egypt. I will surprise you very much now. Here is a very rare frame. This is the end of the 4th millennium BC. These are the oldest beads made of meteorite iron from the burial of a noble lady in the necropolis of Gurza. This is the 34th, 33rd centuries BC. They are kept today in London in the Petrie Museum of Archaeology at the University College. And here you see the patina is not even completely removed because it is absolutely unique. Moreover, these beads were part of a large necklace that included gold and semi-precious stones that the Egyptians considered precious, i.e. turquoise, azure, amethyst. These are such classical stones. That is, this idea of the heavenly ore was developed in Egypt in the deep antiquity. And in fact, this is a very unique evidence. Only from very ancient texts, from the era of the pyramids, we know that even in those distant eras, in the 3rd millennium BC, there was a very strong metallurgy in Egypt. And I will tell you about this in a little more detail. The master of art and crafts was a bird, the great Mr. Memphis. Here's his most famous image from the tomb of Tutankhamun. Wood, gold, from faience, his teapot is made. And since we are interested in metals, what he holds in his hands is a sacred staff of a bird uniting the signs of power, life, and indomitability in itself. It is made of black ritual bronze, which is encrusted with gold. And here, in the large frame on the right, you see the eyes of the sacred animal, the god Setha, which was revered not only as chaos but also as a great power. And accordingly, this power is embodied in this, including the staff of the oasis, which is an element of the great staff of the god of the bird. In the Memphis temple of the god, which was insanely ancient, it was one of the capitals of Egypt, which, according to legend, was founded by Menes, the first king of Egypt. There was a stone that contained the so-called Memphis Theological Tractate. And when in the 9th, 8th centuries before the new era, the Nubians came to Egypt, and the Nubians will also arise in our horizon today, even if they conquered Egypt for a short time, then on the one hand, it was an invasion, both national, but on the other hand, think only from the 3rd millennium before the new era, the Nubians were under the Egyptian military and cultural yoke. That is, they were very much assimilated. And then imagine a completely amazing scene. The temple of the god of the bird in Memphis, where the Egyptians ran from, and there comes the king Shabak. He is a Nubian, his skin colour is like a black tree, he is a conqueror, and he begins to fall into hysterics. Forgive me this word. There's a very emotional text, because he sees abandoned candles, cult objects that are not in their places. He knows where they should be. That is, on the one hand, he is a Nubian, and on the other hand, this is already a land that is absolutely involved in this Egyptian ecumenism, if you want, in this Egyptian world. And then he found a candle eaten by worms in the temple library, which talked about how the god of the bird created the world and who he was, what kind of god he was. And taking this candle eaten by worms, this is a quote, Shabak orders to carve this text on a huge stone that is now stored in the British Museum. The plate of Stela Shabak is read only partially, because the central part of the Middle Ages was used as a grain for grinding wheat. And in this text, for those who are interested, there is a separate lecture about the god of the bird. I will tell you a little about it today. The god of the bird is one of the demiurges of the Egyptian tradition, and he conceives the universe in the heart, because for the Egyptians, the heart is the source of any intellectual and emotional knowledge. And then what is conceived in his heart, he begins to express with his lips. He begins to call the secret names of the gods and everything that existed at that moment. And the text says that the lips and teeth of the bird at that moment are gods and goddesses. Because we remember with you that in the Egyptian religion, there was a single pre-eternal, unrecognizable and incomprehensible deity that in the process of creation disintegrates into myriads of gods and goddesses. And here, in addition to the colossal legend of how he creates the world, it is not very interesting to us now. One important episode, the bird, forgive me this word, he is the materializer of the gods, because the gods are somewhere there, somewhere far away, and here are the temples. And the god of the bird himself, with his own hands, creates the first statues, the first divine bodies. And it was the birds that were subordinated to metallurgists, jewelers, and all those who work with sacred materials that need to be used for the statues of the gods. The bird creates these bodies, and the gods come to the text and say, oh, these are comfortable, these are good bodies. And this is such a deception for them, because at that time, the world was only being built, only came into existence, and we live in a world in which the gods have left, because people once betrayed them in the early days. And if you know how to make a worthy, sacred flesh, then this is one of the guarantees that the Spirit of God or Goddess will still enter the statue during the worship. All those people whose names we know and whose names we do not know, who was associated with the production of this mysterious art, they all subordinated to the great Lord Memphis. Moreover, if you look at his pedestal, here is such a beveled front part. There are the names of Tutankhamun and so on. He cut off the sign on which he stands. This is Ma'at. This is the world order. He is Keteb Kermat. He is the one who knows the secret laws of this world. And as a sign that he is a god associated with mysterious materials, he has a chippet of a blacksmith and a jeweler on his head. This is the chippet that the Egyptian masters, so that the sparks from the chepe would not harm them in any way. Egyptian jewellery art is a very special topic, very interesting, because it is associated with witchcraft and magic, because any Egyptian jewellery work can be disassembled, the paradigm that is embedded in it through a set of symbols, materials, history. Now you see the relief from the tomb of the great vizier Meri Rook in Saqqara. He was the vizier of Proteti during the reign of the first king of the 6th dynasty. That is, this is the frontier from the 4th to the 23rd century before the new era. Here you see, first of all, the absolutely incredible gravity of this work in the upper right corner. Before the new kingdom, the fire in the metal melting pot was supported with pipes that blew. Can you imagine how quickly these people died? Feathers will appear at the end of the 16th century before the new era. Before that, all the jewellery art of the ancient and medieval kingdoms were literally people who blew these pipes in order to burn the fire. This is an account because despite the fact that there is a lot of gold in the Egyptian Nubia, and as it turned out only the surface layers are developed, now these Russian specialists work on the deep layers of gold. There is a lot of gold there. Still, as you understand, in the 13th century BC, the king Seti I, a great wise man, a mystic, a lover of art, went to the golden priests himself. He was the first and perhaps the only pharaoh. At least there is no other information about other kings. And when he saw that from the Nile Valley, from the caravan of donkeys and sentenced to death, because the sentenced worked there, 1/5 of the rest remained white bones in the desert. Sati was horrified, and he built not only a temple there, he founded fields there. He dug wells along the whole road so that people could drink water when they went to mine gold. When you look at the Egyptian golden things, you should understand that these things were made with incredible difficulty. And all these priests were found. This is a completely different, interesting topic. And finally, the gold was taken further, brought to the banks of the Nile. In Nubia, there was a special system of fortresses, especially from the Middle Ages. In each fortress enterprise, there was a person who measured, weighed the gold, and then melted it in rings, or in bags with gold sand. They took it to the capital. And the third point that is here is the lower right corner of the dwarf. The fact is that not only in Egypt, but also in many other cultures of Africa, the dwarves were considered to be carriers of a special magical power. It was believed that this physical damage was compensated by the world of gods in a special power of Kika, a magical power which was expressed in the transformation of the essence of the material. Let's say you have the magical power of Kika, you take wax, pour a certain figure out of the wax, you have a certain goal. But even if you read the ritual correctly, nothing will happen. Because if you have a magical power, or you somehow acquired it from a magician or some other recipe, then together with the words Kika is included in the wax so that the magical figure fulfills its condition. The dwarves lived in the courtyards. Since the times of the Great Pyramids, there have been many burials of dwarves who were insanely rich people. And of course they were used for entertainment, but many outstanding jewelers were dwarves because a priori, according to the ancient Egyptians, they had the ability to change materials and give them a special power. When we talk about the Egyptian artist, about the Egyptian master who works with these materials to create these amazing works of art, and we have to understand one very important thing. This thing is on this wonderful stela which is kept in Louvre. This is the stela of the king's artist. His name was Ertezin. He lived in the 21st century BC under the Tsar Mentuhotep II of Neferpetria. And this is his biography. I won't go into details, but the point is that he says that he was a great mystic, that he was a deeply educated priest, that he knew the calendar, that he knew the secret properties of materials, that he was, roughly speaking, a priest magician. And then he lists it all, and he says, I was also an artist in my own business, and I was able to convey the pose of a running man who shoots an arrow and a woman who's hidden from the arrow. And I was able to make incrustations from any noble stone. But the stone here means the material. Next, the next item for pride, especially for the Egyptians. His eldest son is as excellent in this art as he is himself. This is the art that can be conveyed within the family. And, you know, it's absolutely amazing when you look at what he knows, how much he is involved in this mysterious temple art. And he says, I was also an artist. This is a huge subtext. We can guess, of course, that he was an Egyptian master. But here, in this stele, which is kept in the Louvre, it is amazingly emphasized. The primary context is clear. Let's ask the question, when did the Egyptians actually start working with metals? Due to the fact that many things were melted, we will turn to the texts of the oldest chronicles. In front of you is the Palerm stone. This is a fragment of a huge chronicle of the ancient kingdom of the 5th dynasty, which mentioned the most important events that were made during the reign of the first dynasties of the Egyptian kings. For example, in the 27th century BC, from pure copper, this is emphasized, was made a Rostovaya statue of Tsar Khasakimui, which was called Vysok Khasakimui. Do we imagine that statues are something sacred? And we must also imagine that they all pass through a special ritual of twisting of the lips and eyes, which made them alive for the magical and ritual space. Therefore, all statues of kings, for example, have a name. And this statue, which is mentioned in the chronicle, is Khasakimui, Vysok Khasakimui, in the archive of the Tsar of the 5th dynasty, Neferir-Kara, the archive of the pre-pyramid temple. This is the 21st century BC. It is said about a large statue of the god Iki, the god of music, the son of Kador, which was made of electrum. But these are such creations, these are events of the year. This is not just a list of some events. This is something very, very important. And the fact that it was really important, I will prove to you now. An incredibly beautiful monument, one of the best jewellery monuments of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which tells about what masters were in the ancient kingdom. This is the head of the cult statue of Hornehene. Nehen is an ancient city in Upper Egypt, one of the most important centres of the sacred Tsarist power, where the god Hor was revered, and accordingly his sacred bird Sokol. That is why this city the Greeks called Irakonpol, and how Irakonpol, you will most often find it in the literature. This is the head of Sokol, which is made of a golden sheet by the method of forging. The eyes are encrusted with obsidian. They create an absolutely amazing feeling of sight. In 1887, James Quibble, a great archaeologist, finds a platform on which stood the central part of the temple of Hornehene in the Middle Ages. That is, in the 19th centuries before the New Era. And then, due to the fact that the temple of the Middle Ages was not preserved, Quibble was given permission to see what was under it. And digging up this platform, he would find not only the famous palette of Narmer, which everyone knows well, but also a lot of other archaic monuments in Egypt. He would find this. For a long time, the Hornehene Museum was only exhibited in the form of this golden head, which was included in all catalogues. And somewhere by the early 2000s, by the centenary of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the outstanding German restorer of Egyptian metal objects, feel the level of specialisation of Egyptian metal objects. Christian Ekman, you know this person, he saved the beard of the mask of Tutankhamun. They called the person who did it. He recalled that in Quibble's documents there was a story about a golden bird with a copper body. Copper bodies began to be found in the basements of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. This is a bottomless case, absolutely, but they found it. This is what it looks like. In fact, I saw a copper body when it was not yet assembled. It was covered with a colossal layer of green corrosion, a bright green colour. This is pure copper. And on the left of the elements, there is a divine banner which once stood in the sanctuary of the Neheni temple. This is a copper bird with a golden head on it. Look at these incredible stylized falcons and feathers. Again, the crown of Shuti and the luxurious Uri. And these legs, the holes for the legs that remained in the front, are the parts of the statue of the king, namely Pepi I. This is Quibble's note that stood next to the bird. And here, on the one hand, compare the divine statue of the king and the god Hor. In Egyptian art, the size depends on the social or sacral status. On the other hand, this is a traditional pose of protection. And when you see the sphinxes with the king's chin and so on, this is the first monument with such an iconography. Now, I will surprise you and tell you a thing that you will not find in books. The fact is that still in the basements of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there is a legend that somewhere there is a copper Pepi, which Quibble found and which is actually described. And from here we know that this is Pepi, of course. But when Ekman made the statue of little Pepi, they never found it. I really hope that due to the fact that now the basement is being actively studied in the process of preparing the exhibition of the Great Museum in Giza, and that Pepi will be found, and then we will see a full reconstruction of this amazing image. Can you imagine how many things lie under the floors of Egyptian temples, especially those Egyptian temples that are intact? This is the story with the platform of the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. The Irakonpol falcon is a legend, a masterpiece of Egypt's mythology of the age of the ancient kingdom. There is even an assumption that the head was originally without a crown. The alloy of gold differs on the crown and on the head of the falcon itself. And judging by some other elements, most likely the crown was made a little later, adding to the grandeur the image of a sacred bird. In the same cache, under the floors of the Iroquois temple, some more amazing things were found. This is all the Cairo Museum, which I will show you now. But first, I would like to stop for a minute on what idea. After all, not only the Tsar, not only the priests, but also the high-ranking officials and artists. And we usually know the biographies of the Tsars, which tell us how much they donated, gold, statues. There are a lot of such Tsar's decrees. I won't even list them. On the other hand, we sometimes have a biography of an artist who says that he was also an artist and knew how to do something. And there is a very surprising case. This is Stella from the Metropolitan Museum. She is provincial. You can see it in her work. It's so simple, to put it mildly. This Stella was also found in Iroquois, and she was brought to a person who was a high-ranking member of the Nihinsky choir. His name was Choir MHF. Choir, and its beautiful name. And imagine for a second that you have an opportunity in life. Imagine staying in eternity, and you are told there will be a 2 quoiques 1 stone. The more the text fits in, the more it will fit in. There will be no more. The most important events of life can be shown here. You can have 2. It's better to have 1. And you, in fact, should choose from this life what you would like to tell your descendants. For example, to tell about something extraordinary, and this simple Stella, because in this era of the Middle Kingdom, this is the 19th century BC, the capital of Egypt. At this time, this is the city of Ichitaoui. This is a modern city next to the Swayamski oasis. The capital is not excavated. There is still a huge village of Ichitaoui. It has never been excavated. And so a letter comes from Ichitaoui, from the pharaoh himself, that a new statue is ready, a cult one, a metal one, of the Nihinsky choir. And he says that this statue has shocked you, because there was not just the Nihinsky choir, but there was his mother, Isida, on her knees, who was the Nihinsky choir. It was an absolute masterpiece of its time. And then he received an imperial order from Ichitaoui to go to Nihin to the south. A special guard came with trusted people, and the king told him in this personal letter, he quotes his correspondence, that I trust you because you are not just successful in the administration of the temple, but you trust my heart. He trusts my heart. The quote, agree with me. He goes to the capital, and there he finds himself in the house of the palace masters. And there, in this palace workshop, they give him this Asida with a babi, the Nihinsky choir, in his arms, and he says how his hands were shaking. It's interesting, not his mind, but his hands, what he touched from what he received. And he, like a great saint, and she, of course, is a great saint, he brings this statue to his temple and was given, this is the final apotheosis and the complete delight of all descendants. He was given a statue in the personal presence of his majesty, who thereby entrusted him the opportunity to hold such a thing in his hands. This is a very subtle and very important point, because generally in one of the texts, somehow the god Geb, the god of the earth, no more, no less, he was in the status of the heir to the throne, ruled by Shu, the god of the air, his father. And the god Shu went about his affairs from the heavenly palace, and the god Geb saw the sacred crowns lying on the pedestals, and he thought, we should try them on. He is the legal heir, the heir to his father. And he took these crowns in his hands, and out of them came the great mother of Red Hikau, the great charm, and almost killed the god of the earth. And only in time the returning father Shu saved him from the divine death, because he took what he did not have the right to. And when we look, this is a very subtle topic which is very carefully described in Egyptian things. When they touch such things, or when they do something like that, when they touch the great shrine, this is a special royal order. And the fact that it was done in the presence of the king legitimizes it before the descendants. Because in fact, our reaction to the story is, wow, what an amazing story. And there they should ask, did you ask for permission? No, because this is the great shrine which you need to have the right. So, more findings from Zera Konpol. I still remember this statue. This is a very interesting shot. This is the growing statue of King Pepi I, copper, 177 metres full growth of the statue. That is, this is a very large thing. This is the oldest full-fledged growing metal statue in the history of the ancient world, for one simple reason. Usually this was in later times, we must understand this. And here is this Pepi with a staff, he with encrusted eyes. He stood for a very long time in the Cairo Museum in this form until he got into the hands of Christian Ekman, praised to him for many years of life and many works. It turned out this is him, amazing expression of the face. Initially, the statue was made of wood, and this metal volume was put on it, on a wooden statue and fixed with nails. This allowed the statue not to lose its form in case it fell or something else, and it absolutely amazed everyone. I will show you the growth version. It is also in the position of a tsar, in the position of a very famous person, besides being a tsar. That is, this is a gift that the tsar put in the temple of Koronikinsky. Later, when the temple began to be rebuilt, the ancient tsar had already forgotten about it, but it's still a great shrine, so it needs to be removed. But the interest was not only in this, because when Quibble found this statue, it was very heavy. He was interested in this and found that there is another. This is how they look today in the Cairo Museum. Apparently, this statue was intended for the holiday Sed, for the holiday of the renewal of the tsars, and a baby who had apparently a gold-made genitalia. It is naked, and here under the tree there was a golden hip band. It is clear that it has not been preserved for some reason until our times. And look, an adult Pepe, and inside him a magically renewed young Pepe who gives him youth, prosperity and long years of reign. These two statues pass by them, and the whole crowd of tourists of the Cairo Museum just does not understand what they are passing by. And of course you will agree, this is an amazing German work that allowed us to see an amazing portrait, a sculptural portrait of one of the outstanding tsars of the 6th dynasty of the ancient kingdom. Here is another young Pepe for you to compare the sizes. Well, it is clear that the young Pepe has a large hand. Here is a part of golden fragments, golden accessories of this sculptural group. It is lost. Further, there's a very interesting thing. Look, let's suppose you are an Egyptian tsar and you have a lot of options how to become famous in the centuries. Well, for example, put a colossal statue in the temple. This is good, but it can be usurped, but they can rewrite the names of the descendants. It will not depict you, but the one who rewrote your name, because the name is more important than the portrait similarity. You can put some other monument, but it will still be just an impression of your name. And where is the impression of your nobility? In Egypt, there is a very interesting way to capture such a thing. You need to present a statue of yourself who's doing something. For example, who's making a sacrifice. Now, there will be a lot of such examples. Now in front of you is a very rare monument. This is a lid of a container for ladon, from the Tsar smoker. Below a much later smoker, a turquoise arrow shows the lid of what? From above, so that you understand. This is a traditional smoker. It is called Esatesh. The hand is worn out. It ends with the image of the god Hura. This is a traditional Tsar smoker of the Egyptian temple. The lid depicts the Tsar Sanusit from the 20th century to the new era in the pose of prostration in front of the cult statue of God. That is, in front of God himself. And when someone smokes ladon of this smoker, then a magical effect of the revival of everything depicted happens. And while this living smoker, or even specifically this lead in the temple of Sanusit, I will forever prostrate in front of his God, so that there is no doubt. Next to the title, all this is perfectly spelled out. A rare thing in the Cairo Museum from the palace complex of Deir el-Balas. For those who are interested in the Egyptian geography, here's such a reference. This palace complex was very, very serious. The next monument, which I cannot pass by, is associated with a completely detective story. This is a famous French artist Egyptologist. He makes incredible scientific reconstructions, Jean-Claude Goulvin. This is the labyrinth of Menemeta Thregs in Havaria. The famous Strabon complex, which he described, said that he shook it more than the pyramids of Giza, despite the fact that it was allowed only in the upper tier of the room. They said that there is an underground where the minds of sacred crocodiles and holy relics of kings are stored. The temple was not a labyrinth in terms of our idea of a labyrinth of the Teknon Palace and so on. It was just huge, and there were shrines, judging by the preserved fragments, of all the main gods of Egypt. The problem is that it adjoined the pyramid of the king himself, this place which is now Hawara al-Makta. Next to it were the noblest lands of the Fayoum Oasis and the canal of Bar Yusuf, where the central lake of the Fayoum Oasis joins the Nile. It is a very ploughed area. Plus, it is an area where there were many monasteries. That's why the ancient monuments were damaged very much. This is how it looks now. Due to the fact that the highest ground level is 1.5 meters, the water is actually under this desert. Several times the English, the Americans, the Poles, the French, the Belgians tried to start the excavation of the labyrinth, and realised literally from the first season that such money just for pumping the water, and no one agreed to it, despite the fact that the result is not clear. That's why it is such an unsuccessful place. And after that, well, for archaeologists, after the well-known in the 20th century Saddle Al, the high Aswan Dam, the water rose so much that it flooded the interior of the pyramid. And in the 19th century, there were still William Matthew Flinders Petrie. He explored everything. There are even the most interesting finds there. A piece of the mummy of Menachem III he found there. Now you just go literally 10 meters underground and the water starts. It is flooded. And about this place in general, everyone forgot except for the right honest Egyptian girl, Sabahin, who knows how to dig. In the 1960s, one of them, probably with her husband or with someone from her big family, dug out the parts of the central cult group of the labyrinth, the group that stood in the sanctuary of this temple. The parts of this group are absolutely amazing. And as you understand, they didn't, the legal hands, the part was bought by the Munich Egyptian Museum, and it was bought by Sylvia Shostka, after which the director of the museum could not go to Egypt ever. The other part was bought by the outstanding Swiss collector of ancient bronze, George Ortis, from Lausanne in 92. By the way, The older generation, for some reason, does not remember this exhibition. The whole collection of orties was exhibited in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. And now we will look at these things and try to understand what honest Sibahin means. First of all, this is the Fayum Oasis. This is the land of Sibek, the great god of the crocodile. Look at the work. Black bronze with gold incrustation. Each literally bump of this crocodile is made uniquely. Look at his face, what kind of incrustation he has in his eyes. There is an animalistic, just incredible. So on both sides we have two such crocodiles. Next we have the nobles, the highest nobles of the court. Next we have the queens. I'll show you now. And in the centre there was a sculptural group of Amenemhat Theg himself, who became famous in Egyptian history as one of the most bright self-theologians. Before the main image of this group, there were small kneeling images of him. He was in black bronze. He was praying for his own well-being. And now we look. This is a fantastic monument. I'm an incredibly happy person. I'm holding it in my hands. Here, Svetlana Ismailovna Kadja, edited this exhibition in 1992. I just came to her when I was very young, and she took my hand and said, "Let's go with me." And of course, I could not leave him. He's very decently preserved because, at the request of Ortis, the patina is preserved. On the one hand, you can see a sculptural portrait, and on the other hand, this greenish patina is preserved because here the percentage of metals in this copper, that the patina becomes exactly that shade of green that the Egyptians called uwaj, is the colour of immortality. That is, we initially imagine in the temple a red statue. It is copper. Red is the natural colour of the male body in the Egyptian canon. And over the years it begins to become the god of immortality. It begins to be covered with the colour of the desired patina, which symbolises eternal life. Absolutely amazing. Encrusted eyes, massive ears, because we remember that he must hear the prayers that are addressed to him. And on the forehead of the Uri, there is even preserved an element of golden incrustation. There is a lower part of this statue. It is hollow. Naturally, it is hollow. And inside it was filled with its wooden base, as it was with Pepi the Fashion, which I have just shown. It is said that the lower parts, they also exist, or rather, Ortis died. I have never seen the lower parts, only this was brought. But you will agree that the image is incredible. That is, there is such a greatness, but I would say there's also such an unkind look that you involuntarily understand why in the hymns of that time, for example, the Wilmouth of Sitapi, he writes that the king is the grace of the Nile stream. That is, the degree of glorification of the king is so excellent that it beats absolutely all canonical hymns, which we know that there were around the royal person. This one in black bronze on the right is exactly those miniature kings who stood in front of a large group in the pose of giving gifts. Hands with their hands were not preserved. By the way, look here. You see how different the shade of the metal is. Here's a classic black bronze with a large addition of gold, which gives this black colour. Black is the colour of the Egyptian land. This is also one of the symbols of the revival. But imagine the effect that the central statue begins to turn green and the statues that worship turn black. That is, in this process of aging, there is also an embodied such a magical ritual from their point of view. Imagine what impression these changes made on those who served in this temple because they saw a living miracle. This is one of the queens. Unfortunately, everything that is left is with Ortis. There is a very interesting point here. You see the basis if you look carefully. Then she has a collar on her neck, and there is a bronze element of bulging. Under this element was attached a silver sheet. Her dress was covered with silver, that is, the dazzling white dress was silver. Then there was a sculptural portrait. We can assume that it is also of very high quality, because this is the era of great monuments, great masterpieces of sculptural portrait. Look how the eyes are encrusted in the close-up. And I promised you a wild boar. This is Seneb Sumaya. This is one of his visors. I hope that no one has ever made a visual reconstruction. I can't show it to you. But you can imagine crocodiles, wild boars, queens, a huge royal figure, and small kings who worship him. You can't imagine what happened in 1963 when all this thing appeared on the European antique market, because there was no right to compliance and providence back then, so well-known people lost the right to enter Egypt. By the way, the Pushkin Museum was the first museum to agree to exhibit these things. After it, the exhibition Hermitage, and in exchange for this gesture, in agreement with the Russian Museum of Antiquities and Russian Museum of Antiquities and Russian Museum Antiquities and Russian Museum of Antiquities and the Russian Museum Antiquities and Russian Museum of Antiquities and Russian Museum of Antiquities and the Patient Mary. There in 1911, this thing was found in Petra: gold, Sidalic, Lazurite, Amazonite and obsidian. That is, it is not glass, it is an incrustation of precious stones. Well, you must agree, the work is absolutely exceptional. We can imagine it on the royal chalet, and in general we can only guess what the royal golden burial mask was like. Not only the kings, as you have already understood, but also the queens. Moreover, in the context of the appearance of not a stone sculpture, but a metal one. Again, we often talk about items that could be supplied with additional magic. It was possible to add the necessary ingredients. It was possible to activate the message contained in this monument in a special way. I really love this sculptural group. It is piercing, in my opinion. This is the royal daughter of Sabek Nahad. This is the 13th dynasty. This is the 18th century BC. Look how tenderly she holds the baby. The context of the statue is most likely sad, because in the inscription on the pedestal it bears the late Mahiru's title. That is, she is dead. Most likely she somehow left her life in connection with her baby. And apparently somewhere in the temple this statue was donated. But most likely, of course, it can be assumed that in one of the temples of the mother goddess, so that she's there like Isidah, because this is the canonical pose of the goddess Isidah, who always fed her child with milk. Brooklyn Museum in New York. By the way, today there will be a lot of Brooklyn, a wonderful meeting. For some reason, when you are in America, everyone runs only to the Metropolitan, which, of course, as in Brooklyn, be sure to go if you are in the United States. There is an absolutely amazing collection. At the same time, there is such a thing, very simple, very laconic, devoid of any sacred symbols. Just a woman in a baby's dress feeds her baby. But here, judging by the inscription, this is not just a woman, this is the goddess Isidah, as she is. We remember her legend that she found herself in this world as a simple woman and hid from the forces of evil her baby. This statue was made in the process of some very specific ritual, because in the inscription it says the following, said Isidah: "The great mother of God, Lacuna, here we are with the choir cold, and came to protect this royal wife." There is no further text. That is in copper alloy. This is almost pure copper. It is very visible in colour. But the goddess was made in the process of some ritual of protection for a specific queen whose name was not preserved. And look how interesting the solution is. How this type of art, that is metal sculpture, it is plastic, not stone. How less official it is in Egypt. We are used to the incredible statues of gods, goddesses, kings and queens. And here, the possibility of some slightly disproportionately raised shoulders or turned heads. This art is less official and completely amazing and in its artistic content. The beginning of the new kingdom, and this wonderful monument appears. This is a baby called Amenemheb. This is also the case when, fortunately, the archaeological context has been preserved. The story is very touching. Let's first look at Amenemheb himself. He has a silver flower of water lily in his hands. He is naked. The statue of the deceased is clear from the text. That is, this is an early dead baby. And this flower of water lily in his palm is a hope for immortality. The flower will dissolve. The son will be born in it. He will find a new life. I will now show you the context in which it was found. In the sarcophagus with a mummy of a woman named Yahatep Tanajemi, there were these two statuettes. On the right is her baby Amenemheb. On the left is another child of hers. These are her children who are called Hubanef. These are her children who died in infancy. And on the statues there is a note that her husband, named Juti, when she left, he placed his sons in her coffin in order for their K in that world, their lives to enter. It's just an order for their K to reunite with Himus, with the analogue of their mother. Look how interesting it is. We are walking through the museum, a beautiful object, excellent, wonderful. We can analyse it as much as we want as art historians and Egyptologists, but if we did not know this context, if we did not know about the desire of the priest Juti to do good to his wife, because she clearly missed her babies very much, and he magically united them in another world. And here a very interesting detail appears when a metal monument is born in Egypt, connected with a private person, not with the king, not with the queen, but it is some kind of exclusive. It is a very expensive thing, and it is used for some special occasion. That is, apparently, it was very, very difficult and expensive to order just like that. A wonderful example. This is once a great collection of Count Tsitzini, most of which is now stored unexpectedly in Athens in the National Museum of Greece. There's a magnificent Egyptian collection. Look at this beautiful young man, and you will be very surprised what he has on his head. An unexpected outfit for Egyptians. This is the very beginning of a new kingdom. The battle of the Egyptians with the Hyksos, with the nomads who for some time conquered the north of Egypt, has just begun. And here on the one hand there is a court style of the first kings, the victors. On the other hand there are traditional nobles. Well, the war is over, the world has come, this vertical of official power, and there are people who fought, who in general with their own blood, with their own hands, brought a new kingdom and victory to Egypt. And a number of unique monuments appear, depicting former soldiers with their own hair. This is a hairstyle that shows not a wig, but a deliberate lack of it, and their own hair, as we would now say, cut under the pot. The inscription comments that he was a soldier. He was called Kepu. And this is an incredibly high quality, incredibly expensive thing. It was made because Shannon, his brother, was a goldsmith. He himself made the tombstone for his apparently older brother, who was proud of such a certain military anarchy. He was proud that he was not courtly, that he was not luxurious, that he was not refined. Here he is such a simple guy, but at this time, when there was still an echo of the rumbling war. Such guys walked like heroes because they were the embodiment of the new Egyptian national idea. Remember this thing. I will show you very rare things. You will rarely see it. If you happen to be in Athens, go to the National Archaeological Museum. Not only this masterpiece is stored there, of course the sacred materials, we talked a little about private persons, they will be relevant for the royal sculpture, but not any, because it's easier to put a royal column of quartzite, diorite, granite and so on, but these things are special. Let's first look at the left monument. It is stored in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. This is the King Thutmose III, a famous Egyptian warrior, 15th century BC. We are looking only at the left half. Look at the black colour. In this monument, there is a very interesting composition of metals. You'll see it now. The king is depicted kneeling. In his hands, his second hand was exactly the same, the vessels of Nu. Nu vessels are vessels for offering wine to God. But in Egyptian art, they express the idea of some kind of gift. There are very interesting things in the texts. Of course, the magnitude of your gift depends on your message, on your capabilities. But still, if for you this is a possibility at the limit, it is a huge gift. In the Egyptian language, there is such a word, menu. We translate it as monuments. This is a 3-time drawn vessel of Nu. But these are not exactly monuments. This is a certain action or a certain gift in relation to God, the most worthy and the richest, based on your current state. Therefore, for some, menu is to bring a cow from the dough to the temple of the Queen Hatshepsut of Deir el-Bahri, because there is no other cow, only, of course, a poor family. And for someone, like for Thutmose III, menu is an obelisk that is erected in the temple of the god Amun in Karnak. And if we remembered the lid for the container for Anadon with Nu or Shine, I told you then about the impression of the action. Literally, the image of a hand with such a pot in the Egyptian hieroglyphic letter is the verb haikeni, to bring a sacrifice, to sacrifice. That is, the king orders himself to portray literally as a personification such a materialized sacrificial action. That is, he constantly sacrifices. Next to the statue of one of his successors, Thutmose III, from the British Museum, is not of such high quality, but I just want to show you the image with 2 hands so that you can imagine it. Let's take a closer look at it. Well, first of all, he has a hath bandage. The hath bandage often carries a funeral context. Most likely this image was already made after the death of the king when he was baptized. Look at the gold patches in his eyes. That is, initially the monument was encrusted. That is, he had eyes from some materials that conveyed the gaze. What was the statue for? Like many others similar to it, we have already mentioned the Lodge of the Gods. This is a relief from Karnak of the Hatshepsut era, that is the stepmother of Thutmose III, in parallel with which he, in quotation marks, ruled for 22 years, being her companion. Here, the Hatshepsut stepmother, in a man's attire, brings the sacrifice in front of the naos in which the sacred lodge stands. Look at the red rectangle in front of the naos in which the statue of the deity, there's a mass of images of the king. And it was there on the lodge that such sacred images were placed. That is, here, in fact, in metal, there was a materialized action of the sacrificer in relation to God. Copper, gold, 6.1%, silver, 0.4%, tin, 4.3%. This is the composition of this statue. Look at the patina it gives. This is it from the back. Well done that they did not completely clean it. Again, the story about the green patina again about the colour of eternal life. And if we look at the headdress again and remember that it is for the deceased, then this is a message to immortality for this king. Another monument depicting Thutmose III, surprisingly interesting, is kept in Louvre. I will not voice the proportions of the metals. You can see them all here. Well, first of all, look at the gold, the larger process of gold. The monument immediately became black. That is, the metal is completely different. It is so oily, amazing incrustation. That is, we imagine that the monument was made on the basis of the loss of the wax model. And all these drawings were cut out by wax, then it was cast, and a special golden wire was hammered inside these bands. Well, the classic Egyptian Sphinx, the name of the King Thutmose III, Menhepera, between his paws. These two birds, this is a wretched. This is a symbol of the entire Egyptian people. Each of them is an Udo, and they have broken wings because the Egyptian bird cannot fly away from its king. Each of them sits on the sign of Neb, and between them is the star dua. This is the verb dua, to make a prayer. That is, the entire Egyptian people pray to this king. I will not torture you with questions. I will not ask what it is for, because it is part of the temple lock. And there is a key inserted, which the Egyptians knew well, mechanical locks, and often, by the way, they were made not metal, but even wooden. Usually this is a key with small beads and pins, which in the process of turning open, in this case most likely, the royal treasury. The Sphinx is a keeper, like a lion, so the Egyptian locks are always in the form of a Sphinx figure or a lion who keeps the treasure that is behind him. Pay attention to the fact that he has 9 bows. He lies on these golden bows. The bows are all the peoples who obey the Egyptian king. And on the side, there are 2 pillars of the budget. Indomitability. He is indomitable, durable, a good real lock. He indomitably keeps what he has to guard. Pennsylvania, a university museum. But here's just a very interesting colour, metal. This is Tutankhamun. His name has not been preserved, but a very recognisable face, style, and so on. Also, look, initially, of course, when the eyebrows and eyes, the spectacle was different. All statues are of the same pose, bowing of the vessels. That is, all this is actually a part of these professional gods' boats, where the king, embodied in the brow, had to participate in eternity. And what else could be such gifts to the king, to the world of gods? Please look. In front of you is the wall of the Luxor temple. This is Amenhotep III. And among the vessels with incense, look at the number of vessels in the form of royal figures that hold a vessel for scents in their hands. That is, you can give a scent and you can give yourself a gifting scent. And in this case, from a magical point of view, you launch a constant ritual of giving a scent to God, who is pleased with you, because your nobility is measured by absolute eternity, not even infinity, as long as this object exists. Naturally, the material here may be the precious metals. This is a laurel. This is a statue of Seti down that is made of silver and covered with gold. And here, I will run a little forward. I'll say that this is not accidental, because silver is a lunar metal and rare for Egypt. Very expensive. It was much more expensive than gold, and exclusive items. Here you see Ctesiphon, that is the 13th century BC, in the process of bringing a figure of the goddess Amat, the goddess of truth, to God. This is one of the most important episodes of the daily temple ritual. But before we talk a little about this, I want to mention this. We constantly talk about the skill of an Egyptian artist like the god Ptah to change the essence of materials. There is one absolutely amazing thing which I will mention and quote briefly as you can find it later. It is the decree of Ta Totanen. Totanen is the rising earth. It is one of the superstitions of the god Ptah. The decree was kept in Abu Simbel in the great Cromer of Seti II. What is there? I will tell you in brief with my words. Then I will quote a little. Here we have a king who has already lived, not the first year of reign. There are problems, there is a physical body and so on. Then, on behalf of the god Ptah, a statue is made, and in this statue the body is made of electrum, bones are made of copper, the flesh is made of meteorite iron and is covered with gold. And every time they use, when making, a water wash from the king's body. And then a statue is made. There's a king, and they magically, through this statue, make the flesh of the same rising as the lunar electrum, bones of the same strength as copper, flesh of the same strength, and filled with secret forces as meteorite iron. And this shifting from the material to the living is the main function of the god Ptah. When you read in 2 words about the god Ptah, it is impossible to explain. But this is one of the deepest representations of the Egyptian magic of the material. And then Ptah says the object is perfected as the statue, as the object of the sun god. Ra in his body, that which came out of Ra, which Ta Tatinen created. Ptah examines him as a reverent artist. He likes something, he dislikes something. Here we need to make it better. Here we need to make it better. He does an absolutely incredible work. And then there's one more very important thing. How did he create the statue? The gods ask him. What did you do? He says, I made a statue. But to do this is translated by the verb mes, to give birth. And the Egyptian sculptor sank, the one who gives life. He gives birth to the statue. Mes, just like a woman, Mes gives birth to a child. These are absolutely parallel programs. When I see you, my heart rejoices. I accept you in golden embraces, says Ta to Ramses II. I embraced you with strength, stability and power. I nourished you with health and love and joy of the heart. I filled you with happiness and joy, delight of the heart, admiration and joy. Here is such an absolutely vital, positive paradigm, which through metals, this is known only through metals. The royal figure is endowed by all this. Therefore, when we look at such a statue of the first, or Karamam, most likely in the mechanics of production, in the mechanics of these figures, there were such things that we know by the only one that survived from the list of the decree of Ta to Athen, but this is never mentioned. Well, and the magnificent relief from Obidos, just the same scene with the first one. He has a figure of Mat, the goddess with a pen and the word of truth on his head. And here's the Obidosian triad, Osiris, Isidda and Chor, to whom he gives the sign that he is trying to embody in his subordinate earthly world the paradigm of truth and order. We will stay with you in Obidos for a while and look at the scene. It is in the first hypostyle hall of the temple. The colours are authentic from the 13th century BC. In the centre is Seti Fur. In his left hand he squeezes a bird called Rakid. The whole people of Egypt remember this. He sits on the sign of Heb. This is the sign of the holiday. To his left is the god of the sun, Racharaktes. To his right is the god Ammon, since he is the god of heaven, the god of eternity. He has such an incredible blue colour of the body. I am interested in the fragment that will now be highlighted by the green rectangle. What is highlighted is the gift that Ammon gives to the king during the coronation. This is a large royal club. It is in the background. And in the foreground is the sword that we talked about when we looked at the golden statue of the god Ammon. Look, It may not be very clear, but the handle of this sword is decorated on top with a flower of heraldic lily. Do you see the Shimei lily? And the bottom is shaped like a papyrus. Also note that the handle is not flat. It is as if it were curved. That is, there's a certain bend convenient for taking the sword. Now, I will please you with a very rare, this is a genuine Hypatia handle made of black bronze encrusted with gold and electrum. Brooklyn, New York. And look, here you have a lily, here you have a papyrus, here you have this bend of the handle. I specifically took a technical frame on the right. It is the same inside. There are stops in order to hold with his massive rivets, most likely a copper blade. The thing is coronation, because it is incredibly ceremonial and is signed by all the names of the king. That is, think about it, thanks to absolutely incredible finds, we have the opportunity to revive that relief and imagine what was in the hands of the king. And of course, let's note for a minute what a delicate work. In the left frame, the right part of the handle there, you can see how these golden wires in the original composition of black bronze, these are again things made according to the principle of the loss of the wax model. And it was all cut out by wax, then cast, and then encrusted with copper and electrum wire. A completely fantastic royal thing. In general, few people know about its existence. And therefore, when we talk about ritual objects, I want to please you with such absolutely amazing things. We continue to stay in Abydos, and here before us is Usarketamon, the so-called parade of the god Amon's boat, which came from Karnak to Abydos. So we have the aegis depicting the god Amon. His sacred animal is oven. Therefore, the aegis is a combination of the image of the god's head and the wide necklace of moustache. Well, for the great beauty, there's also a flower of a water lily from which the head of oven is born. So we have the aegis on the nose and on the stern. The central naos, in which this white is the veil. This is the so-called sacred veil. That is, when the doors of the naos are open, it is still necessary not to allow that you could see the cult statue of God just like that. And this is the veil of thin linen, which, like a gas, covers this space so that you could not see it from the side. And look at the abundance of small figures of the king and the gods who are present on the boat, and they all perform the function of protection, veneration, sacrifice. Remember all the black bronze figures that I showed you, including Karamama. On such a boat, Karamama stood somewhere in the front part of the composition, and now you understand. I really want all these things to fit into this context. And now, looking at this boat, I suggest you look at absolutely amazing monuments. We have a sphinx on the nose on high raised legs. This is Tutu. This is a deity that with a fiery gaze kills all the enemies of God and the king. It is always the first on the boat to protect. Look at the standard. 2 snakes crawl out from under Tutu's feet, because this is a divine protection. On his head is a crown of high feathers of enemies. Brooklyn Museum, New York. Tutu, the 13th century BC. Everything is exactly the same, only the crown is missing. Believe me, there is a hole, but the crown simply did not survive. There was a high crown of Chini. We return and go to the very interesting. We of course hope that at least some cult statues have remained for our time. And then an old comrade, Howard Carter, comes to our aid, who in Cairo in the 1920s, in 1921, on the eve of the opening of Tutankhamun, he is also called to some shop to drink tea with Zazanovitskaya. And there he is shown something completely unique. This is something unique, passed through several collections. The monument is priceless. It was bought for a colossal amount by the Miho Museum. Near Kyoto, there's a Buddhist monastery with an incredible museum of Oriental art. In the Egyptian collection, Miho was an exceptional phenomenon. And there is this image. This is the only fully preserved cult Naladin statue from ancient Egypt. This is the 13th century BC. This is Harur, the great choir. This is Sirius's brother, not to be confused with the choir of Isida's son. The statue is made of silver. Then on the silver it was covered with a thin layer of gold. You see, around the shoulder the remains of gold were removed. Next, the wig is encrusted with azure and the eyes are made of mountain crystal. I haven't been to Miho, I haven't seen him in person, but my colleagues, especially the Japanese, who regularly send me various emotions from there, they asked me how his eyes were made. I said, what is it? Well, some very strange, amazing look. First, find out how the eyes are made, then we'll tell you. I found out how his eyes are made. Inside this hemisphere of the mountain crystal, a cone is carved almost to the end of the stone surface. My colleagues say that the look is incredible, a sharp piercing look that looks at you like a living bird. How are they encrusted? You see, there is no encrustation, but this pupil is carved in such a way that it is projected through the mountain crystal. Unfortunately, we can't say that he was holding some symbols of power in his hands. Of course, there was a crown on his head, and judging by the base, there was a crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. And here, of course, I want to see the exact size, 41.9, that is almost 42 centimetres. The monument is large, it weighs about 10 kilograms, and such statues were on the cult boats of the Egyptian gods. It is extremely offensive that we do not know the archaeological context where it was found, because it would be possible to be more precise, to assume what the figure of God is. Look at this incredible monument. If you are interested, go to the internet, find the site of the Miho Museum. They have an excellent site. There are a lot of amazing Egyptian, and not only Egyptian, masterpieces, and you will enjoy it. And praise to Howard Carter, who determined it in time, who saved this monument from possible overflow, and he passed many hands before he found his abode in Japan. And here, by the way, look from the back how well the golden flesh is visible. The story of the golden flesh is written in the Egyptian text because the gods arriving in our world are subordinate to the time Nehek, the time of infinity. That is, the gods are aging. In the morning the sun is young, in the afternoon it is all-powerful Ra, in the evening it is the elder Atum. And here describing the old age of the gods, when their essence is somehow forced, when it becomes clear what they are, when they are no longer surrounded by a great mystery. The text writes a very interesting thing. The traditional images of the gods are made in the following way. His bones are made of silver, his flesh is made of gold, his hair is a true lazurite. This is what we see now, that is the main massif. Well, not the bones, but the context. The flesh is silver, the gold coating is on top, and then the lazurite is in the hair. A masterpiece on a masterpiece. And you will agree, I think I see a little bit by the faces, that most of these masterpieces, many have never seen Louvre. A laughing infant, an absolutely amazing monument. And here you will also see the composition, because the composition of the young man's curls, which show the infancy and composition of the statue, is different. That is, the statue is saturated with grey, and this is, by the way, a unique alloy for Egypt. We do not know more such monuments. 3/4 are copper and 1/4 quarter of gold. Here is such a binary alloy, and the curl is made of black bronze and is so richly encrusted. Work of the 13th century BC. Imagine when he had encrusted eyes, when the eyebrows were encrusted, and on the forehead, as I was asked on the internet, the third eye. Yes, I say no. This is an installation emphasis for Uri. That is, there was a golden snake because it is a royal child. And I think that what attracts you in this monument, what surprises you, is a completely unexpected turn of the head, right? Because we expect a frontal, symmetrical composition. Look what's going on. The fact is that this monument is a small part of a larger monument. This is an unsaved statue of a goddess who holds a baby on her lap, and the baby turned to his mother, ready to receive divine milk from her. This is one of the most, in my opinion, underrated monuments of the Louvre. And here, of course, both the art and the way this image deserve incredible praise. I'll show you more. Yes, 3 parts of copper, 1 part of gold. Look at the face, what a smile, and what golden nails on the toes. This is an incredible play of grace, considering that this is one of the golden centuries of the existence of Egyptian culture. A more brutal, a more serious image, a tougher one, is the Seth. This is probably the most famous image of the Seth. This monument is kept in the new Carlsberg Library in Copenhagen. Look at this interesting upholstery. It is Syrian. It is associated with the god of war Baal. It is not Egyptian. And here I would like to stop for a minute. Of course, if there's a hammer in one hand and any other weapon in the other, there are many examples of such iconography. I would like to stop for a minute on one important thing. It would seem that metal is so easy to melt. We take a statue, melt it, make another deity out of it. This has never happened. Moreover, in ancient Egypt, there are practically no examples of metal monuments usurpation. This is a very interesting thing because stone monuments were usurped all around, as well as wooden ones. But these are not. Rather, if there is some hatred towards the image, it will be ruined, but it will be left and will not be used. Apparently there was an idea that at the time of melting, there was so much contempt for this particular statue that it was pointless to remake it. Here in the statue, there is a remake, a light one, but here they made another one. Let's take a picture of the god of the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. You will see that the horns are fixed, and on the sides of the crown there are traces of Seth's high ears. Here, well, there were no horns here, there were Seth's ears. And then, in the first millennium BC, when Seth began to be associated with anger and rage, they made a god of Ammon out of him. Although, the likeness of the horn and the face of the sacred dog of Seth is, let's say, unclear, but they then decided to make a more merciful god and then use this image in some cult ceremony. From this era, you can see a lot of private bronze sculptures in the New Kingdom. I will stop, of course, only at the most interesting things. Here, you can see an unexpected pose of prayer. In the form of a deity, he spread his arms to the sides. The 13th century BC, and this is a part of the prayer group. And there was a statue of God, a single base, and in front of God or goddess there was a man who spread his arms in delight in front of the deity who was next to him. Paris Louvre. You can sacrifice yourself not only by putting your image at the moment of some action. It is easiest to sacrifice yourself through a name. We continue to look at the things of the Louvre. This is a sphinx of Tsar Simon of the 21st dynasty. Pay attention to the studs with which he fastened himself to the holy ladder. Black bronze, to be honest, not very high quality, but nevertheless a very beautiful incrustation of the Pope. The the Sphinx and his wings and his name. He holds a sacrifice in his hands, and here's bread, provisions, and in the centre, his own name. This gift in the name of God was a very important thing in the central episode of the coronation, but also a complete return. I give myself to you through my name. Here's the composition. You see, gold is a small percentage and there is no blackness. This classic black colour. The more gold, the more this black shade. Silver is also present here in its frontal view. The monument's very interesting. The third transition period. First, Egypt is conquered by the Libyans, then comes the power of the Nubians shortly. And oddly enough, by some lucky coincidence, it was from this period that the brightest bronze masterpieces Karamama from this time. This is Sarasarkhan I. This is the 9th century BC, all from the Holy Ladder. Look how the name is written on the hip belt. And the thing comes from the temple of God Toto, and the God of wisdom, because he has an incrustation in the form of an image of the holy ibis. And of course you will agree how beautiful is the female neck of the Holy Mother of Gods. She covers the king with her son, with her wings, with her back. The Brooklyn Museum. A bit of Brooklyn. They were lucky with the temple bronzes, and the face, despite the damage, was once very beautiful, a monument of the highest class. This thing, I think, Asarkhan II, also the 9th century BC. This is a famous triad of the Louvre. In the centre is Osiris, the golden one, installed on the lazurite pedestal. On the sides are Horus and Isis, and Horus and Isis lost their wigs, which were also blue. That is, initially this incredible colour scheme of the lazurite was supported by the colour of the headdresses, the thing that everyone knows well. Here, look, a very interesting point. There is a border of worlds, because Osiris is depicted as an embalmed ancestor, and Isis and Horus perform the ritual. Now they are alive, just like us, and Osiris is like a statue, like a sacred image. And this thing is very small. Throughout my story, I don't remember showing it so that someone would ask me what it is. Because very often we make a terrible mistake. We replace the idea of the function of the object with what we think it is. Well, if you look at it, it certainly seems that it was in the temple, and it's a very monumental thing in the photo. It's a very small thing, very thin, and behind it there are ears. It's a pectoralis major. And here, next to it, I specially bring you a wonderful Padiaman, a wonderful statue of a priest. It's also a black bronze, and here's a pectoralis major, 3 deities, shown on the priest's chest. We have to study the functionality very clearly before assuming what's in front of us. Most often, and in good foreign albums, I see a photo of this group on the altar triad of Sarkhan. No, not on the altar triad. A suspension on the priest's chest, which was included in the cult of Osiris and Hora. A separate material for the work could be electrum, and the Egyptians produced a huge amount of electrum because Hatshepsut, for example, was proud that the obelisks were covered with gold and the tops were covered with electrum. The triad of Sarkhan V from the Louvre is electrum. This is Sekhmet. Look at the incredible beauty of the mask of the Levite. We'll look at a few examples. This is a very significant monument because it not only represents the deity, but also a protective amulet. In particular, such amulets were often worn by priests at the beginning of the divine procession in the temple in order to scare away any negative influence on the cult statue of the deity. I'll stop for a moment at the Tsar's tombs of Chthonius because this is the period of the third transition. In 1938, On the eve of the Second World War, the French archaeologist Pierre Montez, who excavated in Tunisia, the archaeological zone of Saint Liger in the northeast of Egypt, found untouched czars' tombs in the walls of the temple. They are comparable to the tombs of Tutankhamun in terms of the quality of things, but the first publication of these things took place in 1943. Europe did not have ancient Egyptian gold at all. Now you are looking at the second by the status of the Czar's mask of Egypt. It is the second after Tutankhamun. This is the mask of Tsar Pseusinus IV. Pseusinus, by the way, is a Greek version of his name. The Greeks could not pronounce the original name. It is very beautiful. It is a star that's shown in the city. But here in the Tsar's tombs of Chthonus, not only this incredible gold, but also trade contacts were quite active. The main ones are the 10th and 9th centuries BC. Here silver appears in an exceptional way, and if the external stone sarcophagus used for his burial was stolen in ancient times from the tomb of Zar-Mar-Neptah from the Tsar's Valley, that is, they robbed the tomb of the son of Ramses the Great to make his burial. In this granite tomb there was a stone tomb of a nobleman of the 14th century BC, also stolen from some tomb. The internal tomb and the mask were absolute works of art. If the mask is gold, then the tomb is silver. This is the face of the mask of the tomb of Pseusinus I from Chthonus. It is an incredible work. It depicts this very Tsar. It is an exceptional monument, and he was lucky. The fact is that Montaigne was a very worthy man. He was a real citizen of France. He took part in the resistance. And when the war began, he went to fight the fascists, and he finds the tomb of Pseusinus and a few days before the retreat to the front. If he hadn't found it during the war, it would have already been found by the locals. And realizing that he didn't have time to do anything, he quickly sends the unopened tomb of Pseusinus and other things to the dungeons of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. They came for this tomb and caught these people who came from Chthonus and somehow got into the dungeons of the Cairo Museum to hide the silver tomb. Fortunately, they were caught. The burial was not touched. In addition to Pseusinus the Buff, various royal persons were found in the royal tombs of Chthonus. Why the walls of the temple? It's a delta. The Mediterranean Sea is not so far away. The soil is wet there. The mummies are not preserved there. Therefore, the tombs were made in the very thick walls of the local temple of the god Amun. This is an incredible masterpiece. This is the silver sarcophagus of Tsar Shishonka II, Hikahiwa. He has a falcon mask because in this case the sarcophagus depicts the god of death Saqqara in the form of Saqqara Ceres. It is all covered with ritual images and prayers. And on top of it is the mask of Shishonka II, which, don't be surprised, has gold embroidered fabrics on the top ears. Apparently it's a hat band, and this golden, absolutely incredible face, the water still penetrated there. It destroyed the eye incrustation. These are unfortunately salty groundwater, but the sarcophagus itself is very difficult to guess its equivalent value at that time because it's a very expensive lunar silver. And of course, when you look at it in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, it's no less amazing than the tomb of Amun, and just a very beautiful face. This is also from the royal tombs of Tanis. He was a prince, the head of archers. His name was Unjibao Enjed. And this is one of the most beautiful golden masks of ancient Egypt. It has such youth, smile, even some kind of irony, youth. There is a lot of youth in this mask. This is one of the most famous Tanis masks. Let's get back to the sculpture. And this is exactly the time of the Livian domination in Egypt. It's even a bit indecent for me, from masterpiece to masterpiece. I always repeat this word, but this is exactly how it is. Her name was Takushit. The name is translated as she is a Nubian, while she was a Levian by nationality. Why was she given such a name? Maybe for a very dark skin colour for some reason. She was a famous beauty. Her father was a Levian who served as a high priest in the temple of Isida in Seum in Beit el-Kagar in the Delta. And this statue had the same function as Karamama. That is, in her lifetime, this image on the sacred boat was also the wife of God. And in her mortal state, this is her cult statue. And even in the decoration, some symbols were added. There was a stopjet cut out of her back. That is, it was supplemented with a contemplative context so that everything was safe. She was bought near Alexandria. She changed several collections, and as a result, this is the main Egyptian monument of the Athenian National Museum. I surprise you today. It is made of black bronze and is encrusted with the thinnest silver thread. And you see the great priestess, whose clothes look like friezes with divine reliefs from the walls of the temple where she once served. On the one hand, this is an exact indication that there were embroidered dresses. We know fragments of such embroidered dresses. And on the other hand, this is an indication of another very interesting thing. We know indirect evidence that, for example, in Karnak, the great wife of God, when she served in special solemn ceremonies, her body was painted with the incantations and images of the gods. And even on her tongue, special symbols were written in green. And then, in a later era, it turned into a beautiful ritual dress with golden inserts in the eyes, and the white is made of horn. This is a completely unexpected material for Egypt. I will not describe everything depicted on it, because otherwise we will stay here for the night. But you can believe that here is a blessing from all the greatest gods of the Egypt's delta, because Isium, where her father served, where she was apparently the wife of God, is in the delta. And here are the local gods of the region. Do you know how beautiful are the necks and falcons on her shoulders? Unfortunately, I did not write her exact height, but I remember that she is tall. This is a very significant monument. Behind her is a top jet, which partly shows the deceased context. And even the bottom of the dress and the silver nails are absolutely incredible. It is so embroidered, remember it is little known, because no one associates ancient Egypt with the Athens Archaeological Museum. They did not go to Greece for that. Nevertheless, there was such an incredible black bronze monument. And to complement the image of the beautiful woman of the third transition period, this is Berlin, also the wife of God. This is Merisamun. She was also used for the god's ships. And then look, there's a boat of Sakra on her belly. That is the boat of the god of death. These are also certain attributes after which the statue was used for the deceased cult. And here's one very interesting detail. Look, we have multifunctional statues, which were mainly metal, which could be part of a shrine, part of a memorial cult, simply through the addition to them, which was quite easy to do, any sign. Not only statues are made, but also amazing evidence, which miraculously came to our time. We do not think about it very often when some title arises, the wife of God, the supreme Karnak priestess. The Egyptians are very meticulous. For example, when the king built a temple to God, a special ritual is done in the finale, when the papyrus is given to God, and there is a legal right of God to own his land, economy, and wealth. That is, God is God, man is man, but the Egyptian official did not go anywhere to consolidate the treaty. Pisset's wrote everything correctly, and we have absolutely amazing monuments. Here is a monument from Louvre, and an analogue, although very badly damaged, is in Moscow in the Pushkin Museum. It has never been exhibited. This is a case for a bone plaque with evidence of the intronization of the wife of God, Shepenupaida-Sikun. This is her passage to the Karnak temple. This is evidence that she's really the wife of God, really the supreme priestess. The work is incredible here. The difference in metals is clearly visible. Look, black bronze of one shade with patina, black bronze. I'm looking at the left half now, on semicircular signs of the celebration of Heb. The central two eyes and the central sign of Nefer are electrum. This is an alloy of gold and silver. Hieroglyphs are gold. Look at the difference between gold and electrum. You will immediately see this difference. On the back of the same object, here it is Shepenupit, and before her are Amun, Mut and Khonsu, the great Theban triad, which she's now called to serve. The bone plaque eroded strongly, but it has survived. Now you know what the passage of the supreme priestess on the territory of the Karnak temple looks like. It is clear that it was not needed, but from a ritual point of view, she signed the treaty. This is a very funny part of the Egyptian mentality until it's written on paper, until it's certified by a notary. Excuse me. The ritual action is not performed. Here's such an object. There are also amazing temple objects. This is a hymn with the image of the god Sebek. I showed it at the lecture of Sebek. I'll go through it quickly. You see what a composition. This is also a Louvre. This is the third transition period. Gold and electrum play here in the incrustation, showing this gap between the metals. It has electrum teeth, but the incrustation of the whole back part is gold. Judging by the inscriptions, this thing comes from the temple of the god Sebek in Sumen. This is Upper Egypt, not far from Luxor. What is it for? This is a symbolic image of the body of the god. Blue, green and green beads. This is a ritual instrument. You take this handle and shake the necklace in front of the cult statue of the god so that his essence enters the body of the statue. Unique objects of this kind have been preserved to this day. This is what they try to hide, to bury, but not to melt, because it is an offering to the temple. At the bottom, in the round part of the manat, you can see the head of the god. Everything is clear to you. It is very interesting to look at the wig, because you can see how deep were the bands of the capacity that were bound with gold wire and gold foil to make this incredible decorative effect. This thing could be not only royal, but also private. We continue to walk through the treasures of the Louvre. This is a double aegis of a priest whose name was Nebiun. This is his private thing. If you look closely, and there are two goddesses, the right one is encrusted with gold, and the left one is encrusted with electrum. Can you see the difference in the metal? The right one is a sun goddess, and the left one is a moon goddess. The monument is surprisingly good, despite the damage. Unfortunately, it was located in the groundwater zone. Let me remind you of the difference in the materials. This is a pectoral of Tutankhamun, a great lunar pectoral. The moon disk and serp are electrum. The boat and everything else is gold. This is an addition to show you the difference of these metals, which are used here not only for artistic solution, but also for ritual role. In the handle of this pectoral, it is well preserved. There are two sacred falcons. Look at this beautiful core in the centre. The falcons stand on the sign of Neb, which is a sign of dominion. The signs on the sides are based on two words, Vajet, meaning indomitability, and in the centre Uaj, eternal youth, eternal healing, eternal health. Again, using this instrument, which I repeat is a sacred instrument, but in the obligatory order it is suspended blue, green, malachite, turquoise, all the stones, beads, all these are elements of the temple utensil, which we know very little about. This is certainly a masterpiece, and this is part of such a menot, the Berlin Museum. This is the so-called menot of horses. It was called so. It was the mayor and the vizier. This is said in this inscription, which is between the baby and the goddess. Mut, Semet, Bastet, in front of us, three uniforms of the great wine-headed mother of the gods. In front of her is her son Ihi, who shakes the sisters and the menot. See how different metals, different alloys show the dark colour of the baby's male body, the colour of the goddess. Under the throne of the goddess is a sign in the centre of the breadth of the upper and lower Egypt, and on the sides are the birds known to us, the arachids, the very eudodes with broken wings, the whole of the Egyptian people. And this is a small detail of one temple item, not a royal one, but just some kind of mayor, although of course he was a big man. Can you imagine? Just turn on your imagination how royal things look like, which are used in temple rituals. And now I'm going through the millennia and I'm showing the preserved objects, and I really want that in the context of this lecture. In addition to the temple architecture and the relief, the temple is suddenly filled with a myriad of things, each of which is a work of art. Another Egida, the Egida of Nathan Sid from Boston. You can clearly see how the main form for the incrustation was made, and because it was not preserved here, you can see the notches in the right part. On the left, you can see the Egida in the crown of the goddess Nath. They are both great mothers. The Egida's name is inscribed. It feeds the king's breast, and the king himself is a choir that hides in the swamps of the delta. And here you can see the Wajid and Nekbet, the cobra, and the female of the neck, the patroness of lower and upper Egypt. They protect him. They could have been small amulets at all. The Louvre is in front of us. On the left, you can see a fragment of the great knot of the Aegida. Look at the inscription. What an amazing game of black, bronze and gold. The heart amulet on the right was used for the mummy. It is also made of metal. It is a copper alloy and gold. When I see this monument in front of us, I feel sad, because there is a stereotype that the first great Russian Egyptologist was Vladimir Grinishchov, a truly great man who collected the first large collection in the Pushkin Museum. This is not true. The first large Russian collection was the collection of Grigory Stroganov, which contained more than 500 items in the Stroganov Palace in St. Petersburg. In 1880, he brought it to the exhibition in the German Aachen. After that, it toured Europe and stopped in the Roman mansion in 1910. This collection will never return to Russia, and no one talked about it in Russian Egyptology at all. Among the best items, this is the lower part of the statue of Tsar Petubastis. This is the 8th century BC. Look at the fine work on the incrustation. Now, this magnificent example of black bronze is the pride of the Museum of Kloster Gulbenkian in Lisbon. Items from the Russian collection are kept in the Vatican, and the Vatican bought some items in Aachen, Munich, and in the collection of the great Kloster Gulbenkian. He was a great Armenian oil magnate who collected incredible works of art and left a charity fund and an amazing museum in Lisbon. If you happen to be there, be sure to see it. Remember the Stroganov collection. Unfortunately, we forgot about the Noble collections. The era of Nubian presence was not an easy one for Egypt. On the one hand, I already mentioned Shabak, who found a twig with poisonous worms and restored the ancient Egyptian culture. On the other hand, the great Tsar Taharqa, probably the brightest Nubian king who ruled Egypt in the 25th dynasty, erected grandiose colonnades in Karnak. This is a Louvre piece depicting the kneeling Taharqa before the sacred falcon came in. This is a very rare god of royal aromas. He is also present in the texts of the pyramids. And now a very interesting point. This is a monument that has been preserved in its entirety. The base is wooden. It is covered with silver. The statue of the falcon is made of steatite. It is covered with gold foil and the bronze Tsar Taharqa himself. Do you recognize these statues of the kneeling? That is, every time you see the bronze of such a plan, you really have to think about what it is made of. Lodi with a cultural group is by no means an image of a ritual. It cannot be without the person to whom the ritual is addressed. Now, by the way, there is a grand exhibition of pharaohs of both lands about Egypt and Nubia. On the one hand, the Nubians, who did not capture Egypt for long, were a kindred people. On the other hand, in Egypt there was a persistent expression of Cush Hesed, Cush contemptuous, and they stood out from all African peoples. Therefore, when the Metropolitan Museum puts Egyptian things in the context of the Exhibition United Africa, pharaohs would be executed for this, because there is a red people, there is a black people, there is a yellow people, there is a white people, and that's all that is northern. They stood out in a separate race, and when the time of the Cush Hesed kings was over, Egypt came to this moment very hard, because the Cush Hesed kingdom, the Nubian kingdom, was confused with the Assyrian troops. The Assyrians burned the temples, leaving only the temples. And then, when the next dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs came, they destroyed the Kushite monuments. But there is one very interesting thing here. The stone statues were knocked down part of the headdress, because there are two snakes on the Kushite images, one Uri for Egypt and one Uri for Nubia, and they knocked down not just the face but one of the two Uris, because they have the right to the Nubian kingdom. This is a very interesting thing now in front of you. This is an image of the Nubian king from the Metropolitan Museum. I'm not interested in his pose now, you know all about it. Look carefully at his chest. You see that something was carefully destroyed there. They destroyed the necklace that was on the chest and destroyed the uris that were on the forehead. I'll show you another monument now. By the way, one of the best bronze monuments in Russia. This is a statue of Taharq from the State Hermitage, and now compare the Kushite royal necklace with the sacred head of the god Amun-Ra in the form of an owl. And there are two snakes, the Egyptian snake and the Nubian snake. About the same thing was on the first monument from the Metropolitan Museum. But the Metropolitan Museum was lucky in another way. There is a genuine golden owl that one of the Kushite kings once wore on his chest. Agree, an exceptional work, very Egyptian in its spirit, because a close people with certain differences, one symbolism, close artistic solutions. And here is the Enkush-Popon, the 26th dynasty, coming out of the city of Sais. The Egyptians reached the third threshold of the Nile, pursuing all the images of the Kushite kings. The complex was so great that Kushasset captured the Egyptian land. It was the time of the so-called, as it's often said in science, the Renaissance. And in this Renaissance, they relied not only on the golden new kingdom, but on the era of the pyramids. And certain images of the era of the pyramids were very close to them. This is an exceptional monument. Of course, we will look at it now. This is silver, pure silver, as far as it was possible in ancient Egypt. This is the great wife of God of the times of King Neho. This is just the time of the Sais Renaissance, that is, it is the 6th century BC. An incredible wig face. Now I will show you how it looks. Look at the proportions. It is exceptional. The Metropolitan Museum in New York. This is their pride. It is very difficult to say for sure, but apparently it was then intended for the burial of Neho himself. It is depicted naked, but it is marked by the king's name. She has a cartouche on her shoulder with the names of Neho. That is, it is shown to which king this priestess belongs, who in such an incredibly naked form, holding a scepter here, stands before us in this absolutely exceptional monument, which according to its long proportions is very characteristic of its time. The ruler of the city of Sais was Neith, the great-great-grandmother of the gods, the goddess Androgyne, one of the creators of the universe. And this beautiful image of the goddess Neith is part of a small but amazing story. This is the Archaeological Museum of Herain, the island of Samos, because this thing was presented to the Temple of Hera, which associated Neith with the Egyptians who arrived there. In fact, the contacts were much closer than we think, because one of the pharaohs of this dynasty, Amasius Iliacus II, had a nickname Philalion. After a strong earthquake, the oracle of Apollo in the Delphi was partially destroyed, and he gave a huge amount of precious metals, respecting the oracle in order to honour another god, but which was associated with a great shrine with an amazing image for the Egyptian land. Therefore, this thing, and look how interesting it is. What a falcon with a golden head covers it with its wings. All these wings match the figure of a huge bird with a golden head on its back. This is a very expensive gift, most likely a royal gift. Imagine that it doesn't happen often in our consciousness that among the pharaohs, the statue of the goddess Neith was sent to the island of Samos, Heraion, as a gift to Hera, as a recognition of the power of Hera, as another face of the Egyptian goddess. And there's nothing surprising about it when in the 5th century BC, a little later, Herodotus comes to the city of Sais and looks at the mystery there. He is shown the mystery. He writes very funny things. And in the temple of the local goddess, which is our Athena, Neith is associated with Athena, and something happens, something. This is an amazing revelation of the 1st century BC, when Egypt will approach this melting pot of ancient cultures. And here I want very quickly, without stopping in such detail, to ask you a question. Can you imagine what thousands, tens of thousands of images of the gods were actually made in Egypt in the 1st century BC? I'll show you now. This is a bronze hole of the Cairo Museum, another bronze hole of the Cairo Museum, a showcase with bronze associated with Isis in the Cairo Museum. Each of these images has its own history, because these are votive connections. That is, a person came to the temple, and behind each of the statues of the goddess, there is someone's request. This is very important to realize. We look at these images in the Cairo Museum, in the Pushkin Museum, in Moscow, in the Hermitage, wherever. And very often we ask ourselves, I hope, a question: where did they come from? This is what a secret votive cache under one of the temples in Saqqara looks like, which was excavated by French specialists. This zone between 1967 and 1974. There are 1,262 statuettes of gods, goddesses, wisdom of Imhotep, ritual things. Look how neatly it's put together. This is a naos of some large statue. Look at the Isis with babies. Everything's neatly laid out. What for? First, a new temple is being built. There are more ancient images in the temple. They came out of use. Perhaps they were damaged. They are neatly put under the ground to increase the sanctity of the place. The second point. You turned to the goddess with a request. She fulfilled the request. Will you order a statue of the goddess and transfer it to the temple? It is used as a goddess-made prayer, and it accordingly illuminates the territory of the temple. If, God forbid, the statue is broken, damaged, that is, there was some kind of organic damage, it is also put in a cache. But the broken ones to the broken ones, the organic ones to the organic ones. And then it is very interesting because apparently there was an idea that something bad was coming from the caches with broken things. Because in several well-known holistic caches of Karnak, which the French, including, dug in 2017, the day before yesterday, on top of the broken things, there are sphinxes. That is, the upper monument is a sphinx. It kind of presses down what is under it. Despite all the damage, everything is neatly laid down. But in ordinary caches like this, there are no active sphinxes on top. And this is a systemic phenomenon. That is, there is a certain idea that this is a living creature from their point of view. And now it was damaged, broken. That is, the statue died. There may have been some kind of ceremonial. We do not know this. There is no such thing in the texts which was associated with such burial of the statue. From the same cache, look at the beauty of Isida with the baby. And this is an ancient fabric. They must have wrapped it with fabric. Remember, please, you must have seen the old shots from Tutankhamun's tomb. There's a wooden gold-plated statue of the gods in Nausicaa. They are all wrapped in sacred fabric. That is, they did not just put it on these fabrics. Some have been analysed. There are traces of a large amount of oils. That is, they wrapped it in aluminum foil. That is, these are the living bodies of the gods. This is a living sacred flesh. These shots are absolutely unique. I think many of you have seen it for the first time. In general, where do these things come from? Which are then put in the museum. By the way, yesterday there was news from Egypt. In Saqqara, they found 250 sarcophagi in the collective burial site in the late period, and more than 150, here's the same cache of images. There are Bastet, Isis, Imhotep, Amun-Min, a lot of other statues of the gods. Well, in such caches, there are things of different levels. This is a super masterpiece, Brooklyn. This is a stone Isis with a baby that protects the great neck of the mother goddess. Moreover, in fact, there is a very big secret here. Not only because the neck is the primordial motherhood, the primordial protection. The neck hides this from the naked eye. It has very specific symbolic spells about giving health to a particular person, and their neck hides from the naked eye. That is the magic component on the stone monument itself. This is a very worthy thing, a masterpiece in its own right. I'll go through quickly and show on the monuments, probably more than Louvre, just what could have been found. Anthropomorphic gods, Ta, again black, bronze, gold, unexpected gods. On the left, Hapi, this is all Louvre. Look at the beauty of the god Nile, and on the right is a demon playing on a lute, moving through space on the head and shoulders of his own wife, who is also feeding the baby. This is Beset. Apparently this is a part of some musical ritual instrument? What do you think? A donator who makes an offering to a massive lotus flower, and this is their nevmon. Now this is a kind of mongoose, a sunny animal. Judging by the inscriptions, not only Atum, the traditional god for this animal, but also the goddess Vajt. In fact, sometimes it is almost impossible to interpret who is depicted without inscriptions, only by iconography. The famous cat of Psammeticus Thafarsh, this is all Louvre, and the bull Apis, she's just such a bastard. She holds in her hands a lion's head and a small figure of her own son, Nefertum. Here, such a bastard. The animalism is incredible. Look at the kittens. This is one of the famous Louvre things. By the way, note that she has Okohorojat on her neck. This is a coffin for 2 kittens, a bronze one. And this is a masterpiece located in Russia. Few people have seen it. This is a cat which one of the Russian travellers brought directly from Sakkara. And in the estate of Prince Golitsyn in Nicola Uryupin, there was an evening when different travellers were talking about their distant lands, and he got this, and Princess Golitsyn bought it for any money, and then it was kept in Nicola Uryupin when unfortunately this estate was destroyed. Like many other Moscow estates after the revolution, the cat was transferred to Arkhangelsk. This is the only Egyptian thing in the Arkhangelsk estate. This is the 7th century BC. The wooden upper pedestal is genuine. This is a reliquary. It is empty. Inside, there's still a part of a mummy of a sacred cat. For those who remember, a few years ago we made an exhibition dedicated to a cat in the State Literary Museum. I managed to persuade Arkhangelsk. For the first time in many years, we put it at the exhibition. It is absolutely incredible. By the way, it is very heavy when you hold it. Massive metal. It is one of the best cats in the Russian museums. There is nothing like it, neither in the Hermitage nor in the Pushkin Museum. Another reliquary. Here's such a beautiful ibis. This is a coffin for a sacred bird. It opens in the back and a mummy is inserted there. Everything is made of metal. Another coffin for a sacred bird. Just incredible. It is made of bronze. It is made of wood. The main massif of the body is gilded. There is a mummy. Look, it is made of silver. What paws and what beak. Those who were at the exhibition that ended today in the Pushkin Museum saw such elements of a bird's nose. These are all coffins for sacred birds. This is a bone in it. This is its origin. The Igida is an obvious form of protection. It could be not only on the nose but also on the beak. On the right from Brooklyn, there is an Igida of the mother Apis, a sacred cow which is dedicated to the goddess Isis. The lower one is a different thing. It is made of wood. A priest or a priestess holds this Igida and scares away all demons, spirits, and so on. This is approximately how the Tsar's daughter does it during a divine ceremony. Sometimes the Igida is a masterpiece. Berlin Museum. Look at the face of Isis. Even the fact that all the incrustations fell out does not make the monument worse. These are all amazing things. Or here is the Igida's coat of arms with a necklace. And look at the facade of the temple from which the little goddess appears. And she, in the form of a cow, walks between the overgrowth and the reed in the lower part of this amazing Louvre object. Sometimes it is necessary to be very good at iconography because the details of the crown, the details of the pose, some miniature accents allow you to make completely different attributes. The two similar deities on the left is Khnum and on the right is Amun-Ra. They are completely different deities, although both of them have the head of Omna. Here the crowns and regalia give us the opportunity to interpret the statue. And to conclude this throw of gods, this is an absolute masterpiece. By the way, the collection of Carnarvon was found at the Cairo Bazaar by Howard Carter. This is Nemetallia, the goddess of temple architecture. She is the wife of Thoth, the god of wisdom. This is a statue of the goddess Seshat. She has a temple portal on her head and a sister at the same time. Look at her face, what incrustations of eyes she has. In 2006, Almina Carnarvon sold it all to the Metropolitan Museum, so it's all in the United States. And not only were there statues of gods, this is the true sister of Jitsahina Tau in the Cairo Museum. We talk so much about sisters that God's spouses hold sisters. I'll show you a real thing. The sound of a sister is like a very thin, metallic, melodic rustle. Usually discs are very thin. In one museum collection, I was called a sister as a gift. Light, melodic, very thin, very rustling sound. And from time to time, a rumble, as it's written on the internet. This is not a rumble at all, but a very thin, graceful, musical thing. To conclude, we have a little bit of this episode left. To conclude the episode with the statues of the gods, I will show a large-scale, absolute masterpiece of Louvre. This is the Pantheon of Bes, which embodies the spirit of the whole universe. This is the 6th century BC, black bronze, gold. Let's take a look at it. It has 4 arms. It is all covered with the image of the eyes. It has an all-seeing eye. It has different animals around its head which symbolise its power over all living nature. 2 registers of horns, a solar disc, snakes. Most importantly, it steps over a snake, biting its own tail, over a Zorbaros. It steps over the infinity of time. Behind it is a board. At the same time, this Zoroboros snake encircling it contains the secret power of nature. It must have protectors. This is a shot from above. You see how it goes and how many texts it has. A prayer of a donator around it. This is a thing which was created at the request of the Tsar's son, the only friend of the Tsar's chancellor in charge of the Pahar Palace, in honour of his parents, his father Anhor and his mother Shepaniset, with a request to Bes Pantheos to protect his parents in another world. And in the space of his scorpion, we see the sacred protective scorpions. The whole space is filled with signs, a masterpiece of the 7th century from the collection of Oksana Aslanyan, a very famous German antiquarian. By the way, this is the bottom. The bottom of the foundation is also covered with texts. This is not for the image, but for the magic function. This is an apotheosis of the divine image. Let's look at it again. A beautiful monument, one of the most beautiful Bes Pantheos preserved to this day. These statues need to be hidden, and the text of the canon about the temple of Pandali says directly, when there is a struggle on earth, when there is disorder on earth, take them, hide them in the dungeons, place them in crypts. The temple of Kador-Dinderskaya, the famous sanctuary of the goddess of love, in which there are 3 levels of secret chambers hidden in the walls. 1 level is underground and 2 levels are on the first level, on the level of the human body. On the 2nd level you need to climb the stairs. If we look at this underground level of the crypt of Dendera, then on the walls there is such a list, a monument of the detachment of the Egyptians, where things stood, with instructions of what material were wood, were gold, were black bronze, what size, for example, 3 palms and 2 fingers. And this absolute inventory shows what was stored here. In front of you there is a large bat of the soul of the goddess Kador, Kador in triumph, a sister on the left. And in these lists, again, praise to the accuracy of the Egyptians. There is amazing information, because this is the end of the Ptolemies. This is the 1st century BC. This is Cleopatra. And it is said there that the temple was especially proud of 3 sisters whose hands were made of black wood and encrusted with electrum, which was presented to the temple by King Pepi Fanchon in the 24th century BC. 2300 years, even more, of the existence of the temple object inside the cult. And they were proud, because the ancient object is not some novice of the era of Cleopatra, Her Majesty Cleopatra VII, but 1,000-year-old Egyptian culture, and these are completely different things by status. Here's a fragment of the wall of the crypt. Here are the Aegis and the Aegis, and the living. You see, she has hands in her hands. She holds the symbols of eternal life, and the sun baby sits on her hands. That is in the process of the Temple Act, as they believed. Not only the main cult statue is revived, but even the thing that holds the hand of the priest, the goddess, also enters it. In the vicinity of Dendera during the Second World War, such things were found, hidden there in Roman times. These are fragments of the cult images of the gods and goddesses, gold, stone, ritual rags, a lot of different things, a huge figure of a falcon. This is the gold of Dendera. Few people know about it. It is kept in the Cairo Museum. This is evidence that there are still such hiding places in which the images of the gods and goddesses were hidden in the late period. Such images of the gods and goddesses were adorned. This is metropolitan. This is a small necklace. In general, the length of the necklace is 10 centimeters. This is what is put on the cult statue of the goddess. And here is gold and turquoise and silverware and glass. Absolutely amazing incrustations despite the partial preservation of this monument. In conclusion of my story, I will stop for a couple of minutes on one very important thing. Egypt, in ancient Egyptian Kemet, black earth and Arab alchemy. Black science, this is Egyptian science. In the era when Ptolemy already ruled Egypt, it was Alexandria. Alexandria is from Egypt. It is in Egypt. This is not Egyptian land. Egyptian land is Upper Egypt. This is Phoebus. This is the great Achaemenid, when they tried opposing Ptolemy to put a real Egyptian pharaoh. And already in the late period, when Egypt already fully dominated Christianity, it was in Achaemenid that there were the last communities of ancient Egyptian religion, and it was there, against the background of these ancient knowledge, that the famous creators of Arab alchemy texts appeared. Du el Num, Cruxus de Teasabi, and so on. These Arabic texts, by the order of Domo Medici, were translated from Arabic to Florence in the Renaissance to try to touch, so to speak, the ancient Egyptian knowledge. We are now in Louvre. This is the sarcophagus of the great-grandfather Jethro. Again, the bottom is the ground, the lid is the sky. Look at the beauty, the huge goddess of the nudes. This is the part of the lid that should have been the face of the sarcophagus. This is what a mummy sees, as if a mummy could see it. At this time, at the end of the Egyptian culture, an amazing text appears. It is called the Second Book of Breath. It has never been translated into Russian. The story is very interesting. A man is looking for gold. Gold is desirable. A man can get gold. Gold gives immortality. Gold gives immortality of the spirit. Gold gives transformation, transmutation, and change. Gold gives transformation of the entity to the state of the immortal spirit. Then do so that you are put into a stone. Gold will be put on you, and through gold you yourself will become the whole classic alchemical mistake, because they were looking for a stone that makes material gold. And it was about the sarcophagus that gives gold to the spirit and overcoming the gold of the material world, the burial mask or whatever is buried in it. Here's a wonderful gold-plated burial mask from the Akhmim, the Cairo Museum. The human spirit becomes gold, that is immortal, indestructible, passing the stone of the coffin. The second book of the Breath was translated into English in 1983. They put an absolutely amazing mockery of human greed and an attempt, not knowing, to interpret this ancient knowledge. They were looking for the gold of the spirit, not a stone that turns into material gold, something else material. According to the scripts, the last centuries before the new era, Egypt is slowly fading away, and amazing images in gold and black bronze, silver or electrum, are now being made by Nubian craftsmen of that very land whose kings once cut off one of the Ura because they are not Egyptians. This is the last frame of the lecture. This is the aegis of the goddess Isis. It is large. This is the nose of the goddess Ladia. Ladia is wooden, so this is the aegis of the goddess. On her chest is the name of the king An-Nekhmani, who ruled the kingdom of Meroe in the 3rd century BC. Far, far south, a different language, a completely different power. Because when in Roman times Vagut began to investigate after the death of Cleopatra what was going on in Africa, he was told by scouts that there is a faraway golden kingdom of Meroe because they were rich, and a woman named Kandaka rules there. Kandaka, in fact, was not a name. It was the title of the mother of the king. This is Africa. There was a very specific matriarchy, and the mother of the king was the great sacred keeper of this empire of Meroe, who spoke a different language, but the goddesses of Ladia still had these completely Egyptian images, like this aegis from Kava. This is such a large archaeological zone. Now this is London, the British Museum.